Hey guys, it's M. And today I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. It's been a minute since I uploaded here and I'm trying to get back into the swing of things, and I wanted to hit another smaller topic before I got into all of these. That's how you can tell when I initially wrote this script it wasn't this long. Zombie Army 4. A game I fell in love with literally out of nowhere. I'm not even really that sure how I ended up playing it. It might have been free on PS Plus or something once, and with a name like Zombie Army, one of the most generic titles imaginable, I wasn't expecting much. But then I started playing it, and before I knew it, I'd finished the campaign like 5 or something times and cleared Nightmare on every mission I owned. I don't think I've ever straight fallen in love with a game like this since Monster Hunter Generations, and that was in like 2016. So today, I'd love to share one of the greatest and underappreciated zombie games in existence with you. Zombie Army looks fucking amazing. I mean, just look at the background of this video. Huge set pieces, lighting coming pretty much off of everything, pretty polished and clean animations. I'm shocked this isn't one of those games that make my PS4 sound like it's about to go off the runway. It's hard for me to overly expand on this point because I feel like it speaks for itself visually, and it keeps this kind of visual consistency the entire way through. If I had to lowball, this campaign is about 12 hours long, and you'll be sent to 10 very different locations, each of which breaking off into 3 or 4 different segments in the same area. And I love pretty much all of them. Every time I replay it, I'm always surprised by how much variety they managed to cover with these. From fighting across an infected train station, going across Venice in a boat, to literally hell frozen over. It really cements the feeling that your journey is spanning across the entire world. And in each of these locations, there's always fun things to find and see. Unnecessary small things that sometimes don't even give you a completion bonus, but give the game this feeling of love and charm from the developer. Something you don't tend to feel too often nowadays. I'll touch more on this point later, but replaying a good chunk of this game for this video, I was surprised by how many little Easter eggs and quirky things were just casually hidden in the background, and some things I had never even seen before. The story here is absolutely ridiculous, and the game knows it. It's functionally a vessel for you to do cool things. In short, you're fighting zombies again. But unlike COD Zombies, which tries to take itself pretty seriously with the most batshit things happening in the background, Zombie Army, as I said, knows it's ridiculous, and I feel that helped it do whatever it wanted. Hell, the final cutscene consists of a zombie resurrected trying to hit you with magic while your character smashes their face in with a glorified brick. And as goofy as that sounds and inherently is, it feels fucking awesome. As while the action and situations happening tend to be really silly, the animators didn't hold back because of that fact. The characters don't ever stop and sit down for a cup of tea with the zombies or anything like that. They handle these things as if it's a life or death situation. This is how we get scenes like the zombie shark escape, seeing the destroyed remnants of Rome after your final battle, getting sucked into a portal and waking up in hell itself. And trust me, those are some of the lighter examples in the grand scheme of things. Alongside all this, all of these cutscenes have different variations depending on how many people you're playing with. Again, another example of this game putting a lot of unnecessary but appreciated care into itself. The characters here for the most part are your cheesy action heroes, being serious most of the time but saying cheesy one-liners in the middle of combat. I can't really say I dislike any of them. They all have their own unique charm that they bring. I don't think they're as unique or lovable as the Left 4 Dead crew or anything, but they do have that same kind of vibe to them. Definitely above the World War Z or Back 4 Blood cardboard cutouts of survivors. If there were any in particular I wanted to bring attention to, I want to bring up Werner, Karl, and Hector. Werner is a German soldier who is obviously against the Nazis and who joins the crew. He's the wimpiest sounding of the group, but not in the way where he whines 24/7 and is just being annoying. Simply in combat, he's not as stoic or jokey as many of the other characters. He sounds kinda scared and like he's putting his all into the fight. He was a character that I got after beating the game, and I didn't expect to like him, but he definitely grew on me the more I played as him. Karl is our walking generic badass American hero trope who sells the cheesiness of this game. He's a deep-voiced one-lining machine who doesn't really seem fazed by anything going on, as he has this I'll handle it type attitude throughout the entire game. It's hard to not like him if you like that trope, because he practically embodies it. Then we get to Hector, who's hands down my favorite character, and I don't mean just in this game, maybe in anything. He's a British zombie pilot who joined the Resistance, and he's hands down the funniest and goofiest character here. I really love him. He's super nice to pretty much everyone he interacts with, though he's got a little bit of sass to him. Like Carl, he never really seems super fazed by everything going on, but it's not because of a stoic badass attitude or anything. He's just like that. He never curses or raises his voice at anyone. He's just sort of dealing with what's happening in his own quirky way as if it's like a mild inconvenience. And it's funny to see that contrast of him normally talking to people with him brutally slaying zombies, with his one-liners and callouts still having that casual Hector charm to them. He's just the best. And to touch on my story and cutscene point I made before, every single character here has voice lines going throughout the entire story and even the DLC. This even includes the characters that were added post-game launch, which is really amazing. Whenever you decide to replay the story while all the voice lines tend to lead to the same point, it gives you something new to hear. And if you're in co-op, it won't just be the host of the game's characters talking. The characters will bounce around speaking roles, making it really feel like they're this unit of zombie killer friends. Somewhat still on that point, the characters even have unique callouts for one another that you'll never hear unless you're playing with others. I fucking love it so much. It's why while I don't hold the other characters in super high regard, I wouldn't be surprised if something weird they say in the story or in one of their callouts would make me like them too. So the game looks good and the story, while not serious or deep, is pretty enjoyable because of the spectacle. So the gameplay has to be ass, right? It's a pretty standard third-person shooter control-wise, but in standard Zombie Army fashion, they throw some extra dramatic things onto it. First, takedowns. Pretty much your insta-kill on most things. They all look great. They're all punchy and they never really get old. Let alone, there's a whole lot of them. Varying from the melee weapons and guns you choose, where you initiate the takedown from, and they even have unique finishers for each type of special zombie. I don't want to use the word as it's really corny, but it just makes you feel like a badass when you're cutting through the hordes of the dead. They also give you an entire ammo clip back, so they're helpful to do often. Then we have focus mode, which is pretty much your lock-in ability. In single player, it slows down time and makes you reload faster, making it really clutch when things get hairy. In multiplayer, it simply speeds up your reload speed, and while this does make it a bit worse than the single player variant, it's still very helpful to have. Empty lung is pretty much the same thing, but for snipers. It helps you land your shots a bit easier, and even gives you a small indicator of exactly where your shots are gonna land. Overt kill is your special sniper ability onto focus. It slows down time like both of the previous I mentioned, but it gives you a super powerful shot with no bullet drop off, which can sometimes even insta-kill special enemies. The pistol gets the brainbuster, which lets you lock onto 3 targets and immediately headshot them. This is probably one of the weakest abilities in my personal opinion, but it can definitely help you out in some tense situations. Then we have the special melee attacks, which vary depending on what you choose on the start of the mission. Pretty much any of them will help you get out of a pinch if basic zombies are close to you, and they can stun most special enemies. Then we have the stomp, which is probably the most finicky mechanic in the game. Stomping can be used to kill enemies on the ground like in Dead Space, but it also helps knock ammo or medkits out of certain enemies. It's pretty straightforward, and the only reason it's weird to use because of the way it targets things seems flat out bad sometimes, as there will be occasions where your character will stomp and completely miss whatever you're trying to step on. It's a bit upsetting, but you won't be doing this too often in tense scenarios, so it's not that bad. All of this makes it so while the gameplay for the most part is your fairly standard third-person shooter, these mechanics help punch it up into something that feels special and you can't really get anywhere else. While all the other things I mentioned definitely help, I feel the basic moment-to-moment gameplay is one of the stronger aspects to keep people hooked. Cutting in really quick, just wanted to thank my patrons. Thank you to Chazbox. Love that guy, always love that guy. I see you're investing into this video, a little bit of a long one. If you want to see some videos, some behind the scenes stuff, I recommend you check out my Patreon too. Anyways, back to past me. The enemies. My next 3 points will kind of all intertwine with each other. Your basic enemies here are, well, zombies. Slow and easy to deal with zombies that only become a problem if they're in a horde. Then we have 2 other basic types, like armored zombies, which are just bigger zombies in armor. You focus the spots that aren't armored and they drop pretty fast. Pretty standard, all things considered. And then we get to the crawlers, which are relatively fast, low health enemies that are low to the ground, making them a bit harder to spot when dealing with all the other enemies around. Overall, these 3 are really easy and will make the game feel like a cakewalk until we reach the special zombies, which if you've played this game, I feel are pretty iconic. Suiciders are, well, what you'd imagine. Zombies with bombs strapped on their chest that run at you to blow up, screaming at you while they do. If anyone's completed this game or dabbled around at its endgame content, I guarantee you that scream is etched into your brain. We then reach gunners, flamers, and butchers. Heavy zombies that will probably be your first clue that this isn't your standard zombie shooter, as while most variants of the undead are just mutations or something like that, these zombies are practically just hulking humans. I've clumped these 3 together because they all fit into the heavy guy with helmet category, and you deal with all of them similarly. You want to knock their helmets off and headshot them, or you want to cause them to kneel and do a takedown. While this does sound simple, all of their weapons can kill you very fast if they catch you in an awkward position, leading to them usually being some of the most tense encounters in the game. When you're fresh to playing this, they feel nigh impossible to deal with as their bodies take tons of damage and their helmets cause most of the shots to just bounce off. But once you've played it enough, you'll be able to mow through them. And it's not just due to your damage being generally higher, but because you've gained more understanding of them. They all have extremely accurate hitboxes on their helmets, meaning if you can hit them in the small openings like their eyes or mouth, you can kill them fairly easy and efficiently. When I was at my peak with this game, I was able to kill the flamers just by shooting them directly in their eye. But anyways, enough gushing about them, let's move on to the others. Necromancers, commanders, and suicide generals are next, and like the last clump, these are pretty human-like, even shooting at you with their pistols. But their main abilities revolve around buffing the horde. The suicide generals try to spawn suiciders on top of you, the commander causes nearby zombies to sprint at you at full speed, and the necromancer revives nearby basic undead. They also have this little fun quirk of not dying unless you shoot them in the heart or stomp on them. They're usually who you'll want to target first in the crowds of undead because they can lead to things getting out of hand really fast. Then we get to the zombie sniper and rocket sniper. Pretty self-explanatory, to be honest. They'll get to high ground you usually can't reach and take pot shots at you. This pretty much forces you to use your own sniper to deal with them. But if you think they'll just sit there and let you fire at them, think again, as they'll frequently jump from building to building if they aren't doing anything or want to get a better position. Pretty simple enemies, but can be pretty annoying and deadly if you don't handle them. Ending our common special enemies, we get to the grenadier. They throw grenades at you and have huge shields covering their flank. Like the snipers, they're pretty simple too, and if you have a takedown, you can just insta-kill them from any time or position, making them one of the easiest specials to deal with. Then finally, we have the most special zombies in the game, and honestly some of my favorites. Zombie tanks. Yes, zombie tanks. My least favorite of the final three, but still pretty cool to go against. There are a few variants of them, but they all consist of you shooting their sides until a plate breaks and you see the tank's heart. Yes, this game revels in its ridiculousness, like I said. I used to hate these enemies, but they're used sparingly enough that they are a pretty fun way to break up what you get normally used to. Shadow demons are probably my favorite designed enemies here, and maybe even my favorite mechanically as they're such an active threat. They let out little shadow hands that crawl across the ground, and should you get grabbed, they teleport you directly to the demon, to which they then scream and take a huge chunk of your health, and possibly putting you in an awful position to recover from, as they'll usually warp you somewhere swarmed by zombies. You deal with them by shooting their heart or stomping on them like the commander types, but catching them is interesting. If they aren't attacking you when you're close, they'll warp away. If you shoot the shadow hands crawling across the ground, they'll warp away. So how do you catch them? You usually have to wait until they begin their shadow hand attack. Then you have to maneuver over to them while avoiding the hordes and their hands to initiate a takedown. Or you could go for the quick sniper heart kill while they're at a distance and just summoning their hands. Though this is more difficult than it sounds, as they turn to their sides when they're looking at you when attacking, which was a really interesting design choice that I didn't even notice when I was first playing. So while simple to deal with in concept, dealing with everything else in whichever encounter you're doing with them on top can lead to your absolute worst nightmare if you're fighting them wrong or don't really know how to deal with them. At the beginning of the game, they felt downright impossible for me and caused so many of my deaths. But by the end, while I still get grabbed every once in a while, I pretty much never get downed by them. But this all leads into our final special enemy, the blind screamer. Seemingly the dev's favorite, as they're the first thing you see on the home menu screen. These are pretty much the biggest threats you run into during the game, and they have an ass load of health. They are the fastest zombies in the game and are able to down you the fastest out of any special due to their insane close range damage, alongside a scream that will stun you unless you're in the middle of performing certain actions. But the trick is, they're blind. In the base game, you're not forced to fight any of them, as if you sneak past them while crouching, they won't attack you. If you're forced to fight them, which as we'll get to eventually, you may have to, they're not devoid of weaknesses. They have a weak spot on their back that takes increased damage, but this is probably the finickiest mechanic to them because after a certain point it feels like it just stops working. It's a bit buggy honestly, and I wouldn't rely on that alone to kill them off. If you're not in a forced combat encounter or an arena, running a good distance from them and crouching may cause them to lose aggro on you, letting you either slip away or leave them so far from you, you can handle the nearby threats. Things that make a lot of noise like explosives can draw them away from you, and when you get the incinerate, grenade, or mine upgraded, you'll have a guaranteed way to get free shots off on them due to that making constant noises. Then there's my fastest and favorite method, takedowns. Unlike the gunner, butcher, or flamer which you need to force to kneel, you can always take down this enemy if you have one prepared, but you'll have to get behind them to activate it. And seeing if you have a takedown, you're most likely already in a combat encounter. This forces you in a situation where you have to run up to the thing that could straight up maul you and force it to flinch so you can jump on its back and stab it to death. It's one of those things that always feels cool to do and it never really gets old to me, especially especially because you're always aware if you slip up, it's practically an instant death. All of these special enemies really spice up the gameplay, as they all cause you to switch up your battle plan and think about how you're going to handle the situation. Zombie Army isn't that hard of a game. On normal, despite all I've said, it's a pretty casual romp through all these locations. No matter what guns you use or what level you're at, it tends to be pretty easy. It has some more difficult stretches here and there, but it never really goes past standard third-person shooter fare to me. The higher difficulties are basically artificial difficulty boosts, as they bump up the enemy damage and health alongside making sniper shots harder to perform. Probably my least favorite way to increase difficulty, to be honest. When I play zombie games like this, I tend to like how they test your ability to be able to deal with hordes of enemies they throw at you. Not when they simply throw a bunch of meat shields at you and call it a night. However, this game does do something interesting. Alongside the difficulty, they have a player preset slider. This game will spawn the amount of enemies appropriate for how many players you're with. Meaning when you're with the boys, the game doesn't just get simply easier, as the game compensates by spawning more special or regular enemies at you. If you're feeling like a badass, you can set it on 4 players by yourself and fight what feels like the entire zombie population alone. Or if you're really crazy, you can set it on 4 players and on Brutal, which I'm not even sure is humanly possible. It's nice to have this many ways to customize how you want your experience to go, but honestly, none of them really work for me. 4-man single player is cool, but it doesn't often feel more difficult, it just feels like you're fighting the same guys for longer. And as I said earlier, I don't like the scale difficulty because it feels artificial. Base game is fun for the first 1 or 2 times, but then you notice how much easier the game gets when you level up, special enemies become a joke and you learn how to deal with them, alongside the fact that special enemies are criminally underused for the most part. The Screamers, for example, are only used 2 or so times in the entire base game. So while it's cool you have all these mechanics to kill all these zombies, it's just overkill at a point, as you're extremely strong and the enemies feel like wet tissue paper. If only there were some other mode to handle this issue. Nightmare mode is hands down my favorite piece of endgame content here, and probably my favorite way to play the game. Nightmare mode changes which and how many enemies spawn on every single encounter. So enemies' health doesn't change, but the enemies you're fighting do. The zoo, for instance, goes from 1 optional screamer encounter to forcing you to fight 3 of them in the first part of the level. The first level goes from a cakewalk where you don't run into any special enemies until the final section, to an extremely brutal level where you're fighting multiple butchers, flamers, and gunners. If I had to compare it to anything, imagine the master levels from Doom Eternal, but instead of it only being done for 3 or 4 levels, it's applied to the entire game. It forces so many tense situations that the base game flat out didn't have. It's amazing. All of the knowledge that you picked up over the course of the game that made it feel trivial before feels damn near needed to survive here due to the waves and waves of special zombies. The ones that were heavily underused, like the Screamer and Shadow Demon, appear pretty often here. For instance, in a base playthrough, if everything's going right, with these super special enemies, you might have killed 1 of them. But on Nightmare, by the time you finish, you've probably killed at least 40 or so of them each. Some of which, considering how strong they are, is no small task. I can only really remember 2 encounters with the Shadow Demons in the base game, but they become a pretty standard special to run into here. It pushes the game to its absolute limits of what feels fair and possible, and I love it. I remember at first I thought it was downright impossible to beat, but now I've beat every single level, including the DLCs the devs gave away for free on Nightmare by myself. It's just awesome for anyone seeking a real challenge. And I'm pretty sure this mode alone extended my playtime by damn near triple. Now, does it have some flaws? Yeah. Sometimes I've had encounters bug out and refuse to end. The zoo is a great example, as if you don't run past a certain point before triggering the horde, the mission simply won't continue. Some of the enemy placements in the DLC areas are a bit crazy even for this mode. Schweiger's boss fight immediately comes to mind, as it doesn't really feel like there's much of a strategic way to handle it, so it comes down to a lot of RNG, deaths, and training the enemies for what feels like forever, at least on single player mode. But I feel those few moments don't weigh down the entire mode for me. The endgame here consists of a few things. There's Nightmare, higher difficulties, and the Horde mode. But there's also a lot of collectibles you can find in the main story. Zombie hands, comic pages, documents, and upgrade kits. It's very unlikely you will have gotten all of these in your first playthrough, so they give you an excuse to play it a second time. And these even serve a practical use if you aren't a completionist, as everything besides the upgrade kits will unlock and upgrade certain perks you can get, while the upgrade kits themselves help strengthen your base game weapons. Moving on to the builds here, they're pretty fun to mess around with. Every character has their own strengths and weaknesses here, but you can give them certain perks to help them boost certain attributes. Things things like faster health recovery, higher damage on certain special moves and grenades, lower kill requirements for takedowns or focus. Your perks will help along your build and let you focus more on your favorite aspects of the combat. Like for me, other than Hector being my favorite character personality wise, he takes less damage from melee attacks and requires one less kill for takedowns. So I made a build that helps me do that more often. Polishing your build to your liking alongside all the other things available means there's a fair bit of content to go through here. Zombie Army is a game with a lot of charm and character, which I think is why I love it so much. It feels like something a bunch of people with too much talent, free time, and a really big budget put together. And I mean that in the best way possible. It's why despite me owning COD Zombies Killing Floor and games like that, this one trumps all of the others in playtime for me, as I always come back to it again and again randomly, and it never disappoints me. I always catch some new detail or understand some aspect a little bit better, and it feels great. The charm never gets old for me. It's got a lot more heart than many of those other competitors, which will either add a fraction of the content for the same price, or just feel like mindless drivel after being played for long enough. And to top it all off, this game even has fucking crossplay. If it's not obvious, I really want you guys to check out this game. I'm sure many people noticed it was made by the Sniper Elite guys, then wrote it off as a cash grab and ignored it, but that couldn't be any further from the case. If you like third-person shooters, cheesy action, or just zombie games in general, I can't imagine you wouldn't love this game. It's criminally overlooked, all things considered. The devs even handed out the first DLC clump for free, alongside Left 4 Dead skins for a majority of the cast, just because they could, I guess. But I don't want to gush on and on in this section about how much I love it and feel it's underrated.
I'm always ready to give things a fair shake, come in with an open mind and all that. But recently, I found one game that is so comically interesting, I feel I have to just get it out in a video somewhere. The Backrooms Survival. Truth be told, I kinda missed the Backrooms hype a while back. While I thought it was a cool concept, my thoughts kind of ended at that as I never fell down the rabbit hole. A few months ago, I end up exploring the store and I see a very cheap looking game. I look up the wiki and stumble onto the enemy list, which I see this game has a very colorful cast of characters like Snowman, White Kid, Santa Claus. One conversation with my friend, and before I know it, we're playing. I was very tempted to give this a super simple review with no sections or anything, but I feel it'd be fun for you and me to take this bit by bit. Let me explain to you what the core concept and objective of what this game is so we can get on to all the other stuff. Here in the Backroom Survival, you've been dropped into, well, the backrooms. You explore multiple varied locations looking for ladders in order to continue exploring this endless labyrinth. Along the ways of this ever-changing structure, you'll come across multiple different enemies to go against and items to aid you. This game doesn't have an ending, so the goal is to go as far as you can without dying. Cool concept, right? Now, let's get into everything else. This game's entire concept is RNG. Everything is seemingly random, from the levels you get to the enemy drops to where the exits and entrances are positioned. I said this in my all Dark Souls games review, but one of my favorite Souls-likes in games in general is Remnant 2, a game that thrives off of RNG. And roguelikes tend to be some of my favorite games with things like Streets of Rogue, Enter the Gungeon, and so on, managing to pull multiple hours from you. But then you play this and oh lord. You see, normally with most games, there's certain caps and things to stop the game from breaking itself in certain instances. For example, in Remnant 2, enemies will stay on level with your weapon and you to keep the levels challenging, but fair. They also prevent you from getting a metric ton of upgrade materials to prevent immediately maxing out your weapon, because as I'm sure most of you would immediately think of, without this, there would be no structure and the game would break pretty much immediately. This game doesn't have any of those fail-safes in mind at all. They will quite literally just spawn anything and everything. So there's a chance you can spawn in, find a super strong weapon alongside some things to upgrade it, and you can just obliterate everything that comes after you. The horror of the backroom entities immediately goes away when you practically become the Doomslayer early on.
Not convinced.
Let's talk about the enemies briefly before they get their own segment. These enemies have no form of scaling at all. They start as strong as they end, while your arsenal continues growing comically strong. This leads to them becoming more like loot drops than enemies in most cases, as you can annihilate them before they can even hit you.
Not convinced.
Let's talk about, quite literally, the worst part of level randomization. Dark levels. Dark levels are, well, levels that are dark. It's not one of those games where you can turn up the brightness and see fine either. You're going to need a light source if you want to see anything. Problem is, like I said, every floor and item is randomized. There is a very solid chance you'll end up in one of these rooms without having any sort of light source at all. So now you have to waddle around until you find the hatch to go back down or the ladder to escape. All the while the enemies here can see you perfectly fine. It is awful. Genuinely one of the most surprising choices I've seen in a game. It'd be fine if you maybe had a very limited faint light in front of you, or literally had any way of traversing without banging the walls without an RNG light source, but no. This kind of scenario is probably the time you're most likely to cut the game off, as it's pretty unfair in the first place. Let's talk about the lovely level design. The maps will either be big expanses with walls only at the boundaries, or will be multiple samey rooms connected across the entire level. Functionally, it is the back rooms, and I will say it's cool to have to turn these corners unaware of what's inside of them. Let that be an enemy or item. It kinda has a claustrophobia aspect to it. Not to the same extent as something like Monster 1, but it is present. The problem comes when you have to locate the exit or want to explore a little bit after finding it. The backroom's core concept is the problem. Large, samey rooms and corridors is kind of the point, but it also makes it so on most stages, you have no real landmarks to base where you are. So there will be multiple times you'll walk around for 20-ish minutes looking for the exit, but you can't find anything, and there's nothing to indicate where the exit ladder even is. I can't even really extend on this point much because there's an issue when your entire game is based around going and exploring places, but you can get lost for so long you'll lose interest in playing the game. You'll be invested for the first 10 or so minutes of exploring while the creatures are around, and then you'll begin getting frustrated because it feels like you should have found the exit ages ago. But the inverse is true as well. Sometimes, since everything is random, you'll find the exit really fast, but you'll want to gear up and explore. But since there's no easy way to find your way back to the exit ladder, you could step away and immediately get completely lost all over again. All this could have been fixed with a mini-map that fills itself out as you explore like Remnant 2 has, but nope, here we are, walking around a confusing fever dream. Now what about the big open areas? Surely they don't have the twisting turning room problem since they're outside. No, they don't. However, they have this dark haze that's over everything that's far from you. So you go from samey looking rooms to a samey looking field. The worst and most baffling decision to me is the exit ladder is already a dark color. If it flickered or something it'd be fine, but since it's a flat dark color, if you're in any open area or any area with a dark ground, which very much can also happen, you're pretty much screwed. The one thing I will give this game is its locations are pretty varied and trippy like I said before, making you feel like you're going through this distorted realm that doesn't make any logical sense. However, with all the other stuff I mentioned, it's very hard for that cool bit to shine when you're probably going to end up miffed even traversing them. The backrooms is filled with tons of random crap that's been lost seemingly. You find stuff like phone chargers and cases, which you can sell, but sometimes you'll find weapons like bows or guns. I'm gonna dive into the combat in a second as it's definitely something worthy of its own segment, but I will admit I like the randomness of the loot at times. Given you're in this labyrinth that goes across multiple eras and whatnot, I suppose it makes sense for random objects to be here. Aside from weapons you can use to fight off the monsters, there's also a variety of drinks and stuff you can use to buff or upgrade your things, which may sound weird, and admittedly kinda is. This game amalgamated a lot of really random mechanics, and a good few of which are RPG-like. But it does add a little bit of depth that I feel wouldn't be there otherwise. Managing your inventory, knowing when to eat what for its positive effects, or when to use what to get out of a bad situation, feels pretty cool. Some of the effects are rather broken and let you shard out insane damage, but I think overall this is pretty neat. The upgrade kit and elemental buff effects you can put on your weapon really make you feel like you're getting progressively stronger and stronger as you explore. The only real negative I'd have to say about these things, other than the fact they aren't balanced like I said earlier, is the pickups are almost too random. It's a weird complaint, but there's some things I feel that will quite literally never drop. For instance, this game has a crafting and blueprint system, but the blueprints are so insanely rare, I've only come across one in the hours I've spent playing this game. And unless I just have horrendous luck, I don't feel like I'm in the minority with that. So you'll just end up hauling the motherload of materials on your back with nothing you can do with them. And the randomness is weird considering I managed to find the Gamer Waxy's crossbow, which from what I've seen is one of the most powerful ranged weapons in the game. I found it damn near every time I've played. But they also have something like an air pistol, which is a good bit weaker, but I've only found once. It doesn't make any sense, and I'm very, very curious on the inner workings of this game and what the percentages are for these things. As I've mentioned a few times before, there are weapons, meaning you can fight back and kill the enemies coming after you. This should be cool. Normally in horror, it's just not something you get to do. But in most games where you can directly combat threats like this, it's clear you have to play it smart because the enemies are a good bit stronger than you. It does not feel like that here. The enemies are not that big of a threat at all. You feel so much stronger than them, they aren't challenging to do combat with. With melee weapons, you can block and swing. That's it. The block will absorb a good chunk of the damage, and most of your weapons will kill the enemies in 2 or 3 slashes. So most fights resort to block / block, and the thing is probably dead. Ranged combat is even worse because usually you can just headshot the thing and they'll immediately fold over. You don't feel like this panicked survivor trying to escape a bad scenario. It feels like you're some sort of force of nature with how fast you can destroy these threats. It really does feel like someone said, what if you could fight back, but didn't think about any of the surrounding details to balance that system out. So you just rip through multiple droves of monsters with one of the most simplistic combat loops I've ever seen. The enemies, like the levels, vary in form but not often functionality. Some may do more or less damage, some may be a little faster or slower, but all of them run at you and swing, and that's pretty much it. Funnily enough, your character is faster than all of them. So in most cases, if there's a fight you can't win, you can peel out and there's nothing they can do to stop you. But notice I said not often. There is one other big enemy type that isn't common. We have the Weeping Angel type enemies, which are invincible, and if you turn your back from them, they'll get you. They don't immediately kill you, but they do enough damage where it's a situation you really don't want to get into. Funny thing is, like the basic enemies, you're faster than them too, so you can immediately see one and peel out. What doesn't help is most times they aren't exactly inconspicuous. Many enemies of this type are variants of gargoyle statues. The problem is I haven't seen a level with random gargoyle statues in it, so it's never a thing of, did that statue just move? Once you notice that these things will always be enemies, they won't catch you off guard besides their initial appearance. Funnily enough, however, there's one application of them that's really good. In the snow levels, they have a Weeping Angel type enemy, and it's a snowman. However, unlike the gargoyles, there are several snowmen all over the place, which gives you this uneasy factor the others don't really have when you walk past them. Another enemy I really like, although he fits into the basic enemy category, and plays into the worst level types in the game, the dark levels, is the hounds. They have big glow-in-the-dark bug-like eyes. You'll be traversing and just see them maybe walking across a room or hallway before disappearing. It's kind of cool and a little bit unsettling when you can barely see anything but these big twitchy bobblehead things walking around in pitch black darkness. But in the vein of this game, I can't praise it too long because something else is very annoying and kind of jarring about them. Whenever a basic enemy sees you, they'll do an overly loud jump scare noise before they begin to chase you. After the first few times, you'll be sitting there waiting for the scream so you can just get on and beat the absolute shit out of whatever made the noise. I feel like at a point the devs didn't know how else to make the game scary because there is one enemy I left out, Smiley or Smiler. He's literally just an insanely loud jump scare PNG with no indicator that he's going to happen. It's so loud normally I can imagine it could hurt your ears. With all the other stuff I've already mentioned to you, can you imagine being lost for like 30 minutes looking for a stupid ladder, while at random intervals a PNG smiley face shows up and blows out your eardrums? It's enough to make someone go crazy at times, but it doesn't just stop at the enemies. Whenever your character gets hit, especially if you choose a girl, they'll let out this blood-curdling scream every hit. So you'll often hear the monster blow out your eardrums, then the character will yell like they fell into a Lego pit. The game's really an assault on the senses at a point. Other than those unfortunate things, the sound effects are stock sounds you've probably heard a dozen times over if you've played a game that looks like this. Not much else of note. I know this section may seem short and like it may not matter, but I need you guys to comprehend how often the things I just mentioned will happen. It's like every other minute a loud noise will occur, and it leads to the tedium becoming very annoying very fast in certain cases. Speaking of stock related things, if you've played this game, you'll notice multiple stock cutout images pasted on the walls as you explore. I think they were going for these things being graffiti or just splattered onto the wall, but graffiti does not look this clean. And also you can often see the crusty white edges of the cutouts they used. It's such a silly, simple thing that lets you know this won't be your average horror experience the moment you see one. The areas themselves look fine for the most part, as big dull areas are kind of the backroom's whole aesthetic, but it is funny when you see Baby's first 3D shape box that are meant to be the ceiling lights just flop out onto the floor. The player models here are fascinating. I very much don't doubt that most of them were ripped out of the Unity store somewhere. But one of the funniest parts is in game, one of them, the hazmat suit, the look most people associate with the backrooms, is broken. If you hold a gun with this model, a giant chunk of your screen will just be obstructed. Other than that, the straight up funniest part is the hands, no matter what model you choose, will be the same. So even if you choose a lady or someone with their hands completely covered, you'll be seeing these big lumberjack man hands. This segment is for all the other stuff I don't think is needing of its own segment, or I just don't have much to say on. First, glitches. The game is surprisingly pretty stable, but one time I had a bug that caused the entire level not to load, meaning I got soft locked and had to start the game over for something completely outside of my control. Second, starter classes. This game has a class system and it's a pretty nice addition. Not that they all feel widely different, but having one quirky attribute or spawning with a weapon or item can make little differences in the long term. The dialogue. In multiplayer, this is cut off, but in single player, your character will react to a lot of their first encounters with the things in the back rooms. They're pretty much crashing out at everything they see, which honestly I imagine most would have the same response. And I know it's crazy to say about this game in particular, but it's an immersive touch. The game has functioning multiplayer with proximity chat. I imagine if you're bored and want something goofy to do with your friends, this could be a fun distraction for a bit, especially if you have a few. I spent way longer talking about this than I thought I would, but it's just got so many random things to go over, I felt I had to cover them. The backroom survival, which like I said earlier, is an amalgamation of a bunch of mechanics someone had heard were cool. Had it just been another forgettable random horror game, we wouldn't be here discussing it. However, it feels like playing a blob of every other horror game. It's got good nuggets every once in a while where everything just works, but for the majority of it, it's pretty sloppily put together. Which really sucks because the general concept and idea of these mechanics is really good and fun, but it's just handled so poorly that while you can see what it could be, it's just not it. I imagine if it had a bigger budget or more time went into this, it could have been a hidden gem, but as it is now, no. Would I recommend it? Not really. If you can get it for super cheap, it's a goofy time, but if you're looking for anything super substantial, you're not going to find that here. Anyways,
I happened to see it in the store on sale for 11 bucks. Normally I'd see this interesting character design and ignore it, but when I saw it, it happened to trigger a vague memory of Iron Pineapple playing the beta version years ago. I couldn't remember much from his video, but the only key point that I remembered was that it was a hand-to-hand fighting game, so I ended up buying it. Was it a caveman way of thinking to buy a game I remembered nothing about? Probably, but it helped me stumble into a really unique little gem of a game that's one of my most pleasant playthroughs as of late, and I really want to talk about it. So let's get into it already. The gameplay here is interesting and I imagine could be very divisive. Our main character here, Pseudo, is a fist fighter. When you look at combat in this game, you may think it's a simple cut your brain off and smack buttons kind of thing, but coming into it with that thought process like I initially did will make you think it's the clunkiest, worst controlling game ever. Let me explain. Here you have a light combo, special attack, a dodge, and a parry. There's also a super bar, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Those things I just listed are the main things you will be doing. Where the nuance comes in is how these things flow together. If you simply mash the punch button, Pseudo's combo ender will feel clunky and awful. If someone's winding up an attack while you're mashing, you'll be trapped in your animation, causing you to eat hits damn near every time, because you won't be able to input your dodge or parry. The parry works on a very small stamina bar at the start of the game and grows over time. If you're mashing, the bar will go down and your parry, even if you do land it, won't stun the enemy. It feels flat out disgusting, and why for the beginning of the game, I was really struggling to like it. I was able to mash past a good bit of the intro, but once the bigger threats appeared, it was a battle to make any real progress. But over the course of the game, I eventually learned to understand it. It functions more like Absolver than something like Yakuza. You see, the reason you feel like you're struggling through mud if you're mashing is because Pseudo here can cancel out of attacks, but he can only do it after a punch of his lands. So if someone's trying to attack you while you're striking them, you can immediately cancel after landing your punch in order to block or dodge it. This in itself is cool, but then you notice you don't only have to cancel into dodges or parries. You can cancel into other strings. Once you get good at this game, you'll be able to land your combo ender that usually knocks the opponent back a bit, dash up, and keep the pressure going. But that's not all. When you play well, the game rewards you with the super mechanic that I mentioned earlier. When it fills up, Pseudo will usually elbow the opponent in the face before triggering a first-person camera. If you keep the pressure going at this point, Pseudo will eventually land a super strong strike that will annihilate the enemy's health bar, usually instantly killing smaller stuff. It feels fucking amazing when you reach this point of understanding. And like Pseudo is this super strong badass that could destroy anyone in a few moments. It ends up being strong. Almost too strong. While I do love the combat once you get to this point, you'll be able to defeat pretty much anybody with little struggle at all. And I don't mean this because you're so amazing nothing's able to hit you, although that is part of it. A lot of times, you can just stun lock most enemies or bosses so they can't fight back, trivializing them and their movesets completely. Doesn't exactly make the normal gameplay boring, as I think that flow is still fun and like a brawler's power fantasy, but it ends up making a lot of the fights feel samey towards the end. But this isn't just purely a beat 'em up kind of game. One of the most unique traits about this game is the dice, which you're seeing on screen. Whenever you fight anything intelligent, so basically anything that isn't an animal, you can invoke the first law, which forces you and your opponent to compete in this dice game for benefits in the actual fist fights themselves. I'll admit it, at the start I expected to hate it a lot, thinking it would just be a silly little gimmick I try once and ignore for the rest of the game. But it ended up unironically being one of my favorite parts of the game as a whole. At first it seems simple, just roll the dice and get a higher number than your opponent. But then they hand you these little chisel things that let you do stuff like reroll or lower the value of your opponent's dice at the simplest, or at its wackiest, let you add 6 points to the board with a crab, or randomize every die in a quadrant of the board. At the start of the game when you don't have any dice, it feels like a relatively fun distraction. But once you reach the end of the game where you and your opponent have 3 or so groups of dice to roll, and 7 or so of these modifying chisel things, it's the most tense shit you can ever play. And this isn't including the stuff you can get if you win. There's tons of creative punishments you can give the enemies if you find certain items in the world. Some of these are simple, like getting the first hit or limiting movement. But once you get the better items, you can do things like summon them in any fight the dice game can be played, or make them swallow poison so they'll be stunned randomly in the fight. One of the best parts about the whole thing is, most games with stuff like this will have a mini-game exclusive theme that they play, right? Some chill music for you to take a breather from the moment-to-moment combat. This game doesn't do that at all. They want you to know the stakes are still high. This leads to situations like boss fights having the most intense OSTs play in the back while both of you play, making the scenario feel fucking epic despite how silly it is in actuality. My favorite example of this is the final gauntlet or the final boss, as you really feel the weight of the games being played, and they might mean the difference between you winning or losing a more difficult fight. I heavily fell in love with this system, and sometimes I wish there was a mode where you could just play it against certain bosses or something if you wanted a fun little distraction while playing the main game. Trying to get all the main things out of the way so I can talk about some of the more fun, smaller stuff later, this isn't just some beat 'em up where you walk in a straight line and punch people. There's an entire open world to explore, and for the most part, I like it. There's a lot of varied locations you see over the course of the game that make you really feel like you're on this grand journey. Ignoring the pretty visuals of them at most times, you can find a lot of things that make exploring worthwhile. You can find stuff like small effigies to increase your stats, materials to trade with at stores, new armor sets, or you might find something bigger and unlock an entire new combat style or move. But it feels like you always have an incentive to check around these places. My gripe with it though is navigating it on a first playthrough is really annoying. I spent most of my time there trying to figure out where to go or what weird path to take. Honestly, it's my only sticking gripe with the entire game. Sure, it's not bad after you beat it once and know where to go, but I'd say until the midpoint, most of my time was spent going insane running in circles. Now they do have a map, but to open it you have to pause the game and stop moving. With how weird some of these main paths are, you'll often be stopping, whipping out the map, going a few steps, and then stopping again. It's pretty annoying, I'm not gonna lie to you. I've heard of some extreme solutions for this, like having a mode where the game forces you down the mandatory route and blocks off everything else, but honestly I think 90% of this problem would be fixed if they added something as simple as a mini-map that could be cut on or off. That way you can see where you're going without having to constantly interrupt the gameplay.
Clash I wouldn't say is super heavy on RPG mechanics, but it's a nice underlying thing that ties the whole package together. As I mentioned in the last section, effigies are littered all over the place. These will help you increase your stats, which are pretty self-explanatory. You can increase your defense, your attack, your stamina. Simple to understand things like that. You're not going to be needing a spreadsheet or anything to build your character here. You'll most likely be fine, even if you aren't a serious build crafter. Also, this game is very generous with its level up handouts. As long as your eyes are open, or like me, you just get lost a lot, you'll never really feel underleveled or anything like that. But there's more than effigies. There's also random items scattered around the map. They might seem like they serve no real purpose, but you can trade them for armor for you and the boy, or for dice and chisels, which apply to the board game. Again, like I said for the effigies, these are things you'll collect passively. No real need to grind for them.
This casual item collection even applies to your healing system of the flask. This game isn't like most Souls-likes, I suppose. You don't just have a flask you heal with for a certain amount of health. Pseudo can randomly pick up stuff like animals or bugs, then he mixes them into a brew, and those brews serve as what you heal with. Depending on what you throw in, you can get buffs or debuffs. It's a fun little system. But let's get into the more exciting stuff with movesets. There's small statues you can find out in the open world. Interacting with them will cause Pseudo to fight another version of himself with a different fighting style, or move. Defeating them will allow you to learn that fighting style and use it for yourself. I wouldn't say these are inherently better, as they all feel like they have their own strengths or weaknesses, which means you can go through the game with your starting style and be fine, but they will definitely help you tailor the game to what you want, or just help you make yourself feel cool. Finally, let's talk about the knight armor sets. At night or after you die once, Pseudo is shifted into his knight form. In this state, you look like a shriveled up version of yourself. However, there are multiple armor sets you can find throughout the world. Truth be told, this is one of the most practically useless collectible types, as you're not often in knight form in the first place if you're playing well, and the buffs they give you don't feel huge, but I've never played a game and complained about it giving me more ways to look. I don't even think it's arguable to say that the knight form ends up looking way cooler than Pseudo's normal outfits. Funnily enough, this is the collectible type you'll have to go the most out of your way for. When I initially beat this game, I only had 5 or so pieces and assumed that this was just a slapped on feature. Come to find out, there's like 10 plus different full sets to discover. There's always something to do in this game even after you've beat it, and it adds a good bit of replay value.
Now that we've talked about the basics, let's talk about the plot and writing here. The general basis of the story is very simple and something you've seen many times before. A lone strong man with no purpose running into a youth they need to protect. You might think I'm about to say it's overdone or something, but I'm not saying that as if it's a negative. With it staying on that simple framework for the most part, it makes it so we can focus on small interactions between our main character Pseudo and Boy. Yes, this little thing's name is Boy. Not gonna lie to you, I didn't really expect to grow attached to these two, but the small talk they have is really good. You get to see the contrast between a clearly hurt but numb guy and a relatively naive child that's afraid of hurting people. One of my favorite lines of dialogue in the entire game is the boy asking about Pseudo's father. For a quick bit of background catch-up, Pseudo's dad left him while the boy's grandfather dies at the start of the game. The boy asks if Pseudo was hurt when his dad left him, but Pseudo brushes it off, saying it doesn't really matter. That's just how the world is. The boy says his grandfather never left him, but Pseudo quickly snaps back and says, "Look at where that got him." It was such a real conversation that separated him from a lot of these other grizzled father figures I've seen in gaming media as of late. It's such an immature and harsh response to reflect on how Pseudo never really seemed to come to terms with being left, so he'd rather ignore it or act like it doesn't matter. Well, at the surface, he comes off as a dude who has it all together. When you hear moments like this, it's more accurate to say he's just doing what he has to do. I'd love to gush more about them and their small conversations I remember even 2 months or so after completing the game, but I feel that alone would extend this video by a good clump. But to continue on the good writing aside from them, I want to talk about Gemini, who is our main antagonist for this game. Now, she only really gets 2 scenes in the entire thing, one at the start and one at the end. So you might be wondering why I think she's such a well-written character. It's because if you read into the few things she does say, they paint a full picture. Like Pseudo on the surface, she looks fucking terrifying, more like a monster than anything else. But when you first meet her, she talks about getting the boy. She mentions how she's growing weak and needs a cure that the boy can provide. She's not randomly seeking to destroy this kid's life, but it seems to be the only way she can fix herself. When you reach the end of the game and defeat her, she says she never really liked her position in the first place, and speaks like she was more so forced into it. Too much power and too much greed, in her own words. Defeating her is good for you as she can't hurt your adoptive son, but it's not presented as a flat-out net positive, especially in the moment. You're fighting to protect your way of life, but in turn, you practically ruin hers. It's so good but so subtle, you wouldn't really notice her plight unless you read deeper into her words. And there's so many more scenes that I love, it hurts. We got funny scenes, we got emotional scenes. It all really just works perfectly in my opinion. But let's get off of the direct storytelling, right? Let's go into a really subtle detail that I love. The basic enemies of this game are bounty hunters trying to get the boy and give him the Gemini. You may be expecting a massive roster of throwaway goons, but that's not the case here. You end up fighting the same 10 or so goons across the entire game. You might be wondering how it's possible to
beat up these guys and they keep coming back, but it's because, well, you're fist fighting these guys. Pseudo doesn't kill anybody over the course of the game, he just knocks them out, so they always come back. I really like this detail. I can't think of any other games where it's not just some of the bosses coming back, but the basic goons as well. It leads to them having this villain of the week type vibe to them when you're walking into an area and you hear them talking. You're kind of happy to see these dopey looking dudes after a while. There's a lot more I could go into with how this game sets up its world and its writing, like my favorite line between the boy and Pseudo at the literal end of the game, but I want you guys to play this too, so I'll keep it to myself for now, and maybe talk about it in a future video. This will probably be the last sort of negative, but the voice acting here is a mixed bag. Pseudo's voice actor is really good. So is Gemini's and a select few others. But for the most part, passable at best and violently noticeable at worst. The Master's a somewhat integral character, but he has one of the most generic voice effects I've ever heard. It's like the first deep voice effect you put on when you do voice acting or in audio editing. The Kappa enemy's voice is rough, it sounds bad, and it's mixed pretty weird too. It sounds like a dude with a bad microphone putting on a voice instead of actually being a character. Again, to reiterate, for most parts it's passable, but when you have the best voice actor in the game, the main lead, and everyone else has to follow up after him, it makes for some noticeable points, at least for me. Let's talk about the elephant in the room finally. This game has some weird design choices. Our main character here looks like a hairy, multicolored thumb. The boy looks like a hellish raven, and the mercenaries look really strange too. If you're an art style snob, it might turn some people off, but for me, it makes the game stand out. Yeah, Pseudo could have just been a guy and the boy could have just been a child, but then it makes them slip into the sea of forgettable at face value indie characters. With designs like this, if you saw them anywhere, you'd immediately recognize what game they're from and who they are. And with the good writing, as I mentioned earlier, it'll become more of a passing thing you don't acknowledge the absurdity of until someone who doesn't know what it is mentions it. This game's OST has no right to be as good as it is. Unironically, I can't think of a single bad track in its entirety. It's amazing at best and good at worst. Certain tracks like The Lonely Coast, Gemini's boss theme, or the song are some of my favorites. They manage to convey a lot of different emotions appropriate to the scenes you're on to help really immerse you in this experience, and it's great. Again, when you're fighting Gemini and Dice and her fucking banger of a track is in the background, or when any scene involving the boy comes up, this OST bumps those parts from already good to great. Even some of the scenes with weaker voice acting are often pulled up by the OST. I'd recommend, even if you've never played this game, to give it a listen. Clash is a very interesting but very good game. I can't really say I've ever played anything like it. While the plot's a simple but nice story, when it comes to everything else, it's a really different and unique experience. Do I think it's a game anybody will just pick up and love? No. The art style and combat I think would scare most normal people away. But once you accept those things, I feel you have a real overlooked, underappreciated gem on your hands, with tons of unique content to play around with. If you're the gaming hipster of your group or just want something different, I really recommend you pick this game up. It's a really fun romp I wish more people knew about. Spooky's House of Jump Scares, and no, I don't care that they changed the name, that's what it's called in my heart, has been on my radar for quite a while now. I remember it blowing up around 2016 or so and seeing multiple playthroughs of it pop up on my timeline, but when I saw these, the Funny Bear game was the only thing that mattered to me, so I blew it off. When scrolling the PSN store for something else entirely different, it popped up and I felt a wave of nostalgia flood over me. Eventually it ended up in my library, and I must say, it is something so unique, I feel I can't help but discuss it. And seeing as we're in October, I suppose it fits. But that's enough talking. Let's just jump into it. Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion is probably the simplest horror game you'll ever play. You can run, you get an axe that can stun some things chasing you, and that's it. The game consists of running into doors that consist of randomly generated rooms while various monsters chase after you. It's a very simple gameplay loop that without some spice would lose its steam quite fast. But that's when we get to this game's main trait, the variety of monsters. See, while your controls are simple to use, most of the fun in this game comes from using that simple kit to get around these creatures that come after you with many different abilities. Sure, there are some simple monsters you just run from, as it is standard with games like this, but then you get to the others that can disorientate your vision, quickly go through walls to catch you, or flood the room to hinder your movement. And these are just some of the examples, as this game has 31 or so different creatures to deal with.
each of which having their own unique abilities and counterplay. When you're going through the story of this game blind, you'll always be surprised by the many different forms your pursuers will take. One moment you'll be running from a wall of contorting faces, then you'll be running from a slime monster. It's fun to learn what all these monsters do and operate like, alongside dealing with the tension in between. As unlike most games and how I thought this game would initially work, you're not being chased through every single floor. This game will randomly give you empty floors with no creatures in them at all. Some may think this is boring as you're waiting for your next dopamine hit of a chase, but I'd say it tends to make you more tense and on edge as you're always prepared to hear the chase music go off and be ready to go at a moment's notice. It's a really cool but small decision I appreciate. My only complaint with this gameplay and gameplay loop is in the story, it eventually gets pretty easy. Many of these monsters have one simple trick, and once you learn all of theirs individually, there's not much stopping you from just blazing through the game. At least to there not being much replay value, as you can easily maneuver around all the monsters at that point. Even the DLC's monsters suffer from this. But this is where Endless Mode comes in and turns the game from a cakewalk into a proper horror and I'd say action game. Endless Mode mushes up all the monsters from the DLCs in base game, alongside adding some unique Endless exclusive ones. You then do as you would normally do, run from the monsters and go door to door. But this puts all of your game knowledge into play, as unlike the structured introductions of the other modes, the creatures you get here will be randomly introduced in whatever order the game pleases, meaning you'll have to quickly think on the fly to what all these monsters do, alongside picking up the newly added creatures' abilities. You may be thinking, yeah, but if you do know all those and then learn the Endless exclusive monsters, doesn't it get stale all the same? Not really, because they do something here the base game doesn't. Have multiple monsters chase you at the same time. This is where I'd say the game is firing on all cylinders. Sure, it becomes simple to deal with all these guys one-on-one, but when multiple powers get thrown into the mix at the same time, it really tests your ability to get out of these situations, as there are many strong combinations in this game that could very well destroy your Endless runs. Let's look at a very simple combo to run into. A turnaround character and a chaser. A handful of monsters require you to stare at them in order to keep them from attacking you at full speed. Normally this is fine, but doing this while someone else is actively chasing after you at full speed tests a few things. How well can you maneuver around an area without looking at it? What are you gonna do if you hit a wall? How fast do you go around corners if you need to keep your eye on something or else it attacks you? And this has multiple other variables depending on which chase creature it is and which turnaround character it is. It's really exciting, and understand I just named one combination of creature types. There's a good few challenging duos that you can get that'll really test how good you are at this game. And that's not even all, as sometimes you can get up to 3 creatures, making an already stressful situation that much more intense. My only complaint is you have to go a fair bit into Endless Mode before you experience these combinations of monsters, meaning every Endless run starts off kinda slow. I sorta wish there was a separate mode or toggle, maybe called Double Trouble or something, where they'd immediately allow double enemies to spawn so the game is non-stop intensity once you are in a chase. It'd be perfect for people like me who sometimes just want to dive into the crazier parts of this game. Gameplay without a doubt will be the main component of this simple game. But we have to talk about the writing here, because it's odd, at least in my opinion. If you played the main story, you know. The only real writing you get here is the cat DOS descriptions of some creatures, a few notes, and the ending. The cat DOS and notes give some interesting little bits, but not really enough to sink your teeth into. And the ending, even as said in the game, is a joke. Your 2 endings are you kill the final boss and become a specimen, or you defeat him, the ceiling suddenly falls down on top of you, and you join Spooky's ghost army. To which they say, what did you expect, some serious ending? I'm not exactly hurt by this, as this wasn't a game I was taking super seriously anyway, but it leads to some serious whiplash once you open the DLCs and suddenly they decide they want to have an overarching depressing plot about Spooky losing her life as a kid from her PTSD-ridden dad that ends with you destroying the mansion and freeing all the trapped souls inside. It feels like they made this goofy little game and then said, wait, we can actually write too! And I'm not saying this because I think the DLC's plot is bad or anything. Quite the contrary, because I think it puts a bow on this game nicely, but it's the fact that you can tell they didn't really take things seriously until they noticed they could, to which they dove into the deep end. The tone shift is noticeable and just a bit weird in my opinion. I know some may be thinking, well, what about the unique death screens and death lines? They're pretty good most of the time, but also ping pong in tone quite often due to what our cast is comprised of. Hook Doll is a great example. When you look at Hook Doll, you see, well, a doll with multiple hooks in it, as if it was torture. If you follow the Dollhouse DLC's plot, you know they were trying to bring things to life through dolls with an underground lab you run into.
With the subtle storytelling, it's clear that this doll was experimented on and messed up. When it kills you, multiple hooks are driven into your body, mimicking the state it was left in. And the final death quote, which you can see on screen, reflects the agonizing pain it would have had to deal with. This is cool and, like I said, shows the DLC's strengths and good writing. But then you get to Otto the damn otter and the tone shift is insane. Otto is a FNAF inspired animatronic with no lore other than he's from a pizza place, and when he kills you he does an extremely goofy version of a FNAF jump scare. Becca is literally based off the Rebecca Black Friday music video. And yes, I get they're joke characters, but it doesn't change the fact you'll run into both Peak Hook Doll and Otto the Otter in the same game mode. Is this a ginormous point that brings down the quality of the game? No, not really. It's just something I think about from time to time, and I'd feel weird personally if I didn't bring it up here. We're gonna touch on some smaller things, then we'll wrap up. The visuals. This game has a very simple, blocky, goofy style to it. Some may say it's ugly, but I think it's quite charming. There's not much of note to say about it until we get to many of our creature introductions. Most times a creature gets introduced in Endless, or even in the normal story, they have a unique locale to go alongside them. It's great for the fact of A, having a unique place to go with all these creatures is impressive, but B, it forces an oh shit moment anytime it happens. You go from sprinting down halls of pretty similar looking rooms to suddenly being transported into what almost feels like a different game. The tension building while you await the monster's appearance. Sure, this effect gets lessened the longer you play the game and learn what monsters correspond to which areas, but I feel it never straight up loses its effect. And given how many monsters there are, sometimes it can be more scary thinking it's one monster and suddenly a different one pops out and starts chasing you. Now, I wouldn't particularly say that this game has spectacular sound design in the way that everything sounds weighty and raw, but like every good horror game should, its sound design properly alerts you to whatever you're about to go against in an instant before you even see the threat. This might not sound crazy, but when you think about the fact that there's 31 creatures in this game, it's quite an impressive feat, and done extremely subtly to the point that most might not have noticed how well it's handled here. Let's look at the Merchant for instance. He's a character that'll hurt you when you're not facing him. Your main indicator that he's moving or has begun chasing you is the rattling of his wooden body that immediately lets you know who it is. Ringu lets out a unique nasty groan when she first appears. And then let's end the examples of this with two of my favorites, starting with the Hanged Man. We're about to get into OST, but when the Hangman begins chasing you, he doesn't have any noticeable music start playing. The main way you'll be alerted to him is through the ungodly noise he makes when he appears, as without it, he's mostly silent. It immediately puts you on edge, and it's a really cool way to alert the player. The last one is a simple thing that applies to any chase monster. If they don't have any way to maneuver into the room with their unique ability, they'll begin kicking down doors after you while they chase you. It really gives chases this frantic energy as you run from a creature while hearing it straight blast doors off the hinges. Awesome small touch. But now, let's move on to the OST. Every single monster, alongside having unique rooms and sound effects, have their own themes to go alongside them. Some go for more epic chase music like Body Bags, or uncomfortable vibes like Food Demons does. I'm not gonna say I'll start bumping these in my Spotify playlist, but I feel they all convey what emotion they were going for quite well. It's part of why the empty rooms with no creatures work so well here. The music will either cut out completely, or you're left with a nice casual track. Then the moment a creature shows up, it immediately shifts back into uncomfortable panic. Small things like this really show attention to detail and care, despite how simple the premise of this game is. I know this video doesn't seem that long, but honestly, this isn't that complicated of a game. It's a simple horror/action game where you run through doors and deal with multiple monsters. But as I've said before, simple doesn't mean bad. This game's got a lot of charm to it due to all of its references and simple art style. And it also has a lot of replayability, or simply content to dive into due to its endless mode, the DLCs together, or the base game. All of which have elements of unpredictability and RNG, so no two playthroughs are going to be the exact same. What also helps is it's not exactly expensive, so if it doesn't immediately hold your interest, it doesn't hurt to be a game you just come back to over the time of owning it. It even seems to be getting improved to this day, with an HD patch dropping sometime in the near future.
It's a cool little game that if you're into horror, I'd recommend you take a peek at. But anyways, today we're going to be talking about an actually recent game. Rarity here, to be honest. Space Marines 2. To let you guys in on something, I was really excited for this game. I fell in love with the Warhammer IP a few years ago, to the point where I've watched a ton of videos on it, from Bricky and the Body Video of Warhammer. I don't remember his name right now, I'll edit it in later. But there weren't really many games for it I could get into. I know someone might immediately point to the Dawn of War series or the original Space Marines game, but by the time I got into this series, I was on the PS4, where all I could get were games that were Warhammer related, but weren't part of the main universe I was interested in. Things like either of the Necromunda games or Vermintide. Closest I got to a mainline 40k game was Space Hulk, which is a conversation for another time. When this game got announced, trust me, I was counting the days. And now that it's here, I have some things I'd like to say about it. I feel like most of what I've heard about it has been overwhelmingly positive without bringing up any of the shortcomings. I'll glaze it in the places I think it should be glazed, but I also want to bring attention to some little things I wish were a bit different. But that's enough of this. Let's just start.
Marine squad deployed.
The story here is an excuse for violence to ensue. Basically, the first half you're dealing with Tyranids swarming the planet, then you're dealing with Chaos Marines for the second half, with some little character drama here and there. It's pretty standard, all things considered, but it's a vessel for some amazing set pieces. No matter what Warhammer game I played, from Hired Gun to this, they always manage to have this grand scale to everything, and this game is no different. This really shows itself while you're just playing the campaign, as they threw in a lot of unnecessary but extremely immersive things while you go through it. Things like seeing other Marines fighting in the background, Tyranids swarming all over the planet, Cadians aiding you in your forces, and those are just some of the smaller examples. But they don't stop there. Even when you're just walking around the hub between missions, you'll see things going on in the background, like Marines talking about current events, or some of the speeches you hear them giving their men before a big fight. Many times I'd stop and listen in, assuming since it's something you can walk past, it'd be a short 4 or 5 line thing. But they'll go off on entire monologues that really grip you into this world, even if you're not a Warhammer fan. Also, there's this little detail that there's 2 campaigns. There's one with Captain Titus, then there's another with another set of Marines. The coolest thing about this is both of these campaigns coincide with each other, showing you how wide the scale is for these conflicts, and that it's more than just a one group mission. Both of these campaigns are fully co-op, by the way. So you and 3 buddies can tear through it all together, and it's really fun. And before I forget, the voice acting overall here is really solid. I don't think anyone fell behind in that department. My only real gripe about the story is it's kinda short. I beat the main campaign while being fully immersed in watching all the cutscenes and overseeing the smaller scenes like speeches in about 2 days. But if I had nothing else to do that day, I probably could have cranked it out in one. The side campaign is a bit shorter, and again, you could probably crunch out all 6 of those missions within a day or so. What is here has been polished to nigh perfection, and I'm not saying they should have bloated the game, but aside from grinding, it's a bit unfortunate you can see all this game has to offer within a day. As Yahtzee said in his new review, it feels like the fluff was taken out so you can only focus on the big core missions. Which is good, but with how fun the game is, I would have liked some more levels to play here. But keep in mind, my main complaint here is the game is so good I wish there was more of it, which is definitely not a bad problem to have.
For the Emperor!
The gameplay here is snappy and fun. It never really feels like it gets old. Like most say, it feels like a PS3 hack and slash type of game, where your big guy tears through everyone else. You got a parry, a dodge, a melee button, and your gun. Those are the main things you'll be relying on, and it just works. The closest thing I could say this game feels like is Evil West, but make Jesse a little heavier and give him better firepower. On top of those base things though, you have multiple classes and weapons. All classes play pretty differently and offer unique options in combat. Things like the Bulwark being the frontline tank of the group, the Heavy being able to melt huge enemy swarms, and the Sniper being able to cloak and damn near instantly destroy bigger threats. Every class feels like they have their own role on the team, and nobody's left behind. One thing I don't like about the discourse of this game is people tend to end it at that, letting people think that this game is an easy power fantasy you have fun with and then it becomes boring. I might agree with that point if it's on easy, but on normal and especially hard or above, this game will kick your ass if you're mindlessly clicking through it. If your parries or dodges aren't on point, normal enemies will chew through your health bar. Bosses will flatten you within seconds, and even the little guys, if numerous enough, can easily kill you. This game has a skill ceiling you can learn for sure. It's nice to feel yourself get better at this game and have it pay pay off immediately, with you being able to get out of situations you may have initially thought impossible when you just started playing. If you ask me if I imagine these big ass Space Marines pulling off perfect dodge barrel rolls a year ago, I'd probably stare at you sideways, but it grew on me the more I played. What also isn't mentioned is how grindy the second campaign can be. You see, the gear you start with is fine on normal difficulty, but once you go higher, there isn't much skill can do for you unless you and your team are gods, as they expect you to have higher level gear, meaning you'll run the same 6 co-op campaign missions over and over again to level up your characters and weapons. Again, gameplay's fun and I don't mind doing that for now, but it would be nice to have more than 6 missions to do over the course of the literal days it would take to max out everything. You get meaningful upgrades to your weapons and gear, and they're modular by the way, so at least that's not part of the problem, but a bit of level variety would have been nice. A bigger but more fixable issue is the bugs. By the time you're watching this, it's very possible they'll be patched out, but some of them are really annoying. It's not like Fallout 76 on launch where they'll constantly show up in average play and pull you out of what you're doing, but when they do happen, they tend to force an entire game reset or something else drastic. The main bug most will tell you about is trying to stay connected to your squad. Oftentimes, the loading screen will just freeze and you'll be forced to restart your game to get it to work again. While I was recording for this video, I had an insane bug where all my controls locked up, and all I could do was walk around until I completely died and respawned. I'm sure there's more, but those are the main ones that have happened to me so far. This is more of a nitpick, but the last thing I feel that should be tweaked revolves around the finishers. Currently all they give you is 1 bar of armor, but I sorta wish they functioned like Doom glory kills and gave you a bit of ammo as well. If not just as an overall update for everyone, at least make it a perk. Heavies and snipers become nigh useless when they run out of ammo, and having an active and more so normal way to replenish it without hoping you reach a checkpoint or find a small ammo box would be nice. Throughout the campaign, I'd say the enemies you face are quite varied. Due to the whole game being kinda short and you replaying co-op missions many times thing, it might not feel like it, but there's enough enemies to comfortably fill out this game. As I said earlier, during the first half you're fighting Tyranids. You start off with the little toe biters, but then you go a bit higher and you run into the heavies that brandish weapons, and the snakes that'll try to grab you. Then you go higher from there and you run into the lictors and zoanthropes. Then you get to the boss monsters, to which we end up getting the Neurothrope, the Carnifex, and one mission exclusive boss fight against the Hive Tyrant. It's enough where there's variety, but not enough where you feel overwhelmed trying to remember how every enemy functions. They also have really clear and good telegraphs. I can't think of many times I was playing this game and I've said what's hit me, as the movements seem to be purposely big to let you know when they're coming. It's kinda nice to see after playing games like Elden Ring, especially so in the DLC, where a lot of enemies had tons of delay moves just to throw you off. Or the thing was so big it was difficult to see the telegraph of what they were doing. They're all really fun to engage with, and I can't think of any complaints I really have about any of them. The Tyranids specifically even have a mechanic I think is really cool, and that's whenever a big Tyranid dies, all the smaller ankle biters will immediately fall as well. This leads to you wanting to prioritize certain targets in fights, and will allow you to pull off some pretty clutch plays to save yourself or others if they're in danger. Then we gotta talk about the second clump of enemies, because we aren't done yet. As I said earlier, halfway through the game you end up fighting Chaos Marines. The Thousand Sons and Sneetch's boys to be specific. I hope I'm saying that right. Kinda sounds like a Dr. Seuss character, but I tried. And they're quite a big step up from the early game Tyranids. The small enemies they have for them are some heretic Imperial Guardsmen and some little Chaos Demons. A step above them and who you'll be normally fighting are the Chaos Marines, usually armed with flamethrowers or normal blasters. A step above them are the special types, where we get heavy Chaos Marines and Chaos Mages. The final step is the bosses, where they also get 3 like the Tyranids: Hellbrutes, a Helldrake, and the final boss. The forces of Chaos aren't as numerous as the Tyranids, but they hit a lot harder. Many of them have guns and will flat out destroy your health bar should you be unprepared. But they also lead to some of the most exhilarating close quarter combat fights. Due to them being able to use the warp to their advantage, pretty much everyone aside from the small soldiers can teleport and attack you from close range, forcing you to quickly recognize what they're doing and counterattack. Hellbrutes probably have the coolest variation of this in my opinion, as seeing something that big suddenly warp out of existence just to pop out in front of you is sick, for lack of a better word. It's part of the reason they ended up being my favorite enemy and boss in the game. The team did really good with all these guys when it comes to details and balancing, to the point I don't even have much to say about them.
Charge!
You can also customize your Marines for the second story, and it's pretty in-depth. For your normies who don't really know Warhammer lore, there's a lot of color and pattern options to play around with, so you can make whatever badass Marine you want. And for the lore fans out there, you can play as a good clump of your favorite chapters. I immediately got the Salamanders, the Blood Ravens, and the Imperial Fist colors personal. And it's supposed to only get better, as they said they'll add all the chapters within time. I may sound like a weirdo for this, but deep down, I'm really hoping they add my favorite chapter, the Obsidian Glaives. I can't wait to see the comments on this video after that statement.
Our faith holds us.
This might seem like a short or shorter video of mine, but really it's just because this game's a lot simpler than many of the others I talk about. And that's part of its charm. We've gotten so many things like grand plots with twists and turns, Souls-likes, or the like. It's nice to go back to a simpler time every once in a while where you could just feel like a cool guy doing cool things with your friends. I frankly loved this game, and seeing how they plan on continuing updates for it with a year one roadmap, I feel like even better things are to come in the future. And I'd recommend you give it a try. If not now, when the price drops. And if you're just a Warhammer fan in general, I feel you can't miss out on this. But I feel like I've said my piece. What do you guys think? As always, as long as you're respectful, I'm glad to discuss with you in the comments.
And today we'll be reviewing Rage 2, a game I've wanted to talk about for a long time. For those of you unaware, Rage 2 is a Bethesda and id Software made fast-paced shooter set in a post-apocalyptic world that came out in 2019. I ended up stumbling into it completely by accident a year or two ago, and have beat it multiple times since. And I've always had complicated feelings about it, even since my first playthrough. But the issues I had with this game were so complex and tended to mix with other issues I found, so I found it hard to structure a section-by-section review for this game, because one point would lead to me explaining another 5. But now, I feel I have a kinda good grasp on how I'm gonna handle it, and I can't wait to share my thoughts about this interesting piece of fiction. 2 things of note. I will occasionally in sections be mentioning things only to expand upon them later. As I said earlier, my issues and praises are so compounded here, if I didn't do this and try to explain everything individually when it was first mentioned, we wouldn't get anywhere coherent. Second, as I say all the time, I'm not going to be blindly hating or defending this game. These will just be my own thoughts and opinions. And with all that out of the way, let's begin. Controls in combat here are interesting, and I feel the first thing we should discuss, as that's usually what you buy games like this for. As I said earlier, it's a Bethesda and id Software made movement shooter, and I guarantee you the first thing that comes to mind when I say something like that is Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal. And you're not wrong for thinking in that direction. This game controls very similar to Doom Eternal. Fast-paced, high-sensitivity shooting that even took Eternal's famous double dash. Though before you write it off as a clone or a ripoff, it does manage to have its own flair. Our main character has the ability to force energy from his hand and fling people back, throw a gravity grenade, a portable shield, a force choke, or a ground slam. And on top of all of those, you can access overdrive or rage mode that makes all of your attacks stronger. This helps differentiate it to the point where it does feel like it has its own identity, and it's pretty fun to mess around with. Though before you go thinking it's all sunshine and rainbows, they all aren't perfect. A non-mobile shield in a game this fast-paced is an odd design choice because you usually never be able to sit behind it without someone coming around and shooting you in the back, leading to you usually just throwing it down on enemies since the upgraded version of it can do damage to them. Shatter is amazing on normal, but on higher difficulties it won't even launch enemies back but just flinch them, which I feel ruins the point of it. It's not entirely useless as it can help you line up shots, but other than that it has the effect of a wet sneeze. The gravity shot feels odd. It can launch you in the air and help you get additional height, but I feel when the enemies are launched in the air, the combat's so fast paced you won't have time to sit down and aim at them as they float helplessly through the air. The others are fine. The ground slam is so simple there wasn't really much they could get wrong about it, and the force choke is okay. A bit weird to aim, but still one of the better abilities. There are a few others like Revive and Rush, but they're really simple and speak for themselves, so I feel I don't need to really go into those. And before I escape this point, I feel like I have to talk about the simple ability of just walking around. And Doom, Doom Eternal, Necromunda, honestly most games like this, your character is just naturally fast. There's no sprint button or anything, you just move at the speed you're at. In Rage 2, there's a walk and a sprint button, which you won't notice feels really off until you play this. It feels odd to do all this movement and then have to toggle sprint every time you hit a wall from a dash or you just want to quickly reposition yourself. It's a change to differentiate this game that I honestly wish they didn't make. Still on the subject of controls in combat, let's talk about the weapon choice. In Rage 2, you end up with a lot of quirky weaponry. We have a standard pistol, assault rifle, and shotgun. But after that, we get the grav dart launcher, an energy machine gun, railgun sniper, a missile launcher, and a revolver where when you snap, you set people on fire. These are the base weapons of the game, not including the DLCs, as we'll get to those later. While I do think they're creative, most of them are pretty bad. For starters, on the beginning of your playthrough on anything above hard, enemies will take too many shots to the body for the assault rifle or pistol to be viable. Headshots will one-shot, but unlike Doom, the enemies here are human, so the chances of you accurately landing multiple headshots to make these seem like great options is pretty much zero. The grav dart and fire revolver require you to shoot the target and then do a secondary tap to activate the bullets. So it's a bit awkward to use them in the more difficult arena encounters, as it takes a while to get value out of, well, shooting the enemy. The railgun sniper here isn't as good as the recon scope or the vortex rifle in Doom. If you fire from the hip, the recharge rate is pretty slow, and the AoE isn't large enough to make it a sensible option. When you scope it, it can charge, but unlike Doom's, the charge here is so slow it only feels viable against big bosses or enemies, which only make up about 7% of the game. The energy minigun startup is a bit too slow and it overheats a little bit too fast to be worth using most of the time. In overdrive, it becomes one of the best weapons in the game, but normally it's a bit too clunky to casually use. The rocket launcher seems like it should be good, but on higher difficulties, a direct missile can't even kill basic enemies in one hit. And disregarding that, it's just really slow to swap to. And unlike Doom, you have to reload. And that really breaks the flow of the fight, making it clunky and weird to use in 99% of encounters. The combat shotgun is the only gun that works, well, like a gun. No matter what difficulty you're on, it's always a solid option, and the only gun that feels like it can kill things fast with no real downside. This is one of the biggest flaws with combat in this game. All of the guns except one have a very obvious downside you have to deal with, leading to you only using the shotgun for most of your encounters and making you want to avoid the others, as they all feel like a downgrade and it's immediately noticeable. There were multiple times I'd look at my weapon wheel in a combat encounter and go, that's it? As if I should have had more viable and valuable options. The fun concepts of the weapon felt like they got in the way of them actually being good. But before we completely get off this point, let's go into the throwables. There's your standard grenade, which I feel I don't need to explain. Though there is a fun mechanic here with them, which is when enemies throw grenades, you can bash them back. I initially ignored this mechanic on my first playthrough, but it's actually pretty strong and is really fun when it lands. Then there's the wing stick, which is pretty much a headshotting boomerang that's pretty powerful, even on Ultra Nightmare difficulty. The only flaw with it is if it smacks a wall, it immediately breaks, which will happen way more often than you think it would. Also, it does have a feature where you can make it hit one person and then bounce to other people, but the game is so fast paced, you will have no chance to do this. Then there's the turret drone, and they're fine, I guess. They do what you'd expect them to do, and they don't have the largest health pool, but they can draw aggro from you. The enemies in Rage 2 are pretty basic, until we reach the DLC portion of this video. You're fighting variants of guys with guns, weird naked, bald robot people, and mutants that will run up and slash you. Sometimes their weapons will change, but you pretty much deal with all of them the same, just by blasting them. They all have about the same health pool, and you don't ever really need to change tactics. While I appreciate the fact that they have a few different factions with different styles, dialogue, and designs, this makes combat feel very samey after a while, as they don't tend to have anything to make you change your gameplay style up like the Marauder, Conmaker drones, or things similar, but they do have great attention to detail. You can really get the vibe of any of these groups just by overhearing their conversations or seeing how they stand. And some of the small animations are really nice touches, like when you ground pound, some of them fall back and try to crawl away, and in replaying this game for a video, I threw a grenade and a raider jumped on top of it to protect his friends. Stuff like that lets you know while this isn't a flawless game, someone clearly cared. But back on to fighting, there's also elite enemies, but they're so rare they're barely worth talking about. The generic raider group has a guy with an assault rifle. He's healthy but barely moves, so he hardly changes anything. There's another big guy with a laser gun, and this enemy's really annoying when you do run into them because they shoot in random arcs, so it feels nigh impossible to avoid their projectiles. There's a big lady with a ginormous shield. Honestly, they switch up the combat the most as you can't shoot them from the front, but it feels like you have no good way of actually dealing with them, leading to them being more annoying than an actual challenge. You can't ever knock their shield out of their hands, you can't throw grenades at them as they'll just bounce them back at you, and you often run into them alongside clumps of normal enemies. So it often leads to you flailing shots or abilities at them until they die eventually. There's a minigun mutant who obviously shoots you with the minigun and can also shoot you with grenades from time to time, but he's pretty boring all things considered, and there isn't really much to say about him. The last one is an armored suit guy. They're fast and a bit tanky. They're probably the most inoffensive and fun special enemy to run into in this game. The only minor problem I have with them is hitting their chest can be be a bit of a pain due to how bad many of the weapons are here, but I think them in themselves are fine. As for the bosses or special enemies, they range from average to awful. They have huge mutants, which I feel are fine. I feel their attacks are animated a bit weird, as when they swing at you, it feels like some of their animations are simply sped up, so dodging out of the way of their melee strings can feel odd, but you can get used to it. Their range moves are basic and not even much to discuss, and overall they're okay. They have a robotic variant that you run into later that basically works the same but has lasers. Depending on what weapons you have, he'll either be the worst fight in the entire game or an absolute joke. He has a weak point on his chest that's pretty hard to hit and requires multiple shots at that. But if you have the rocket launcher, you can shoot him once on any difficulty and it'll knock him down. Once he's kneeling, you shoot his back, rinse and repeat until his helmet breaks, where all you have to do is headshot him. And then he'll die. When you're prepared with the missile launcher, fine. But in a point we'll get to later, there's a good chance you won't even have that on your first encounter with this thing, causing him to practically take all of your bullets to put down. Authority sentries are one of the worst and appalling design choices in this entire game, but they are huge stationary turrets you shoot the weak spot of for a few seconds before you dodge or go behind something as they shoot. Rinse and repeat until they die. I don't understand how you could make a movement shooter like this and then go on to make this the most repeated boss fight. The most boring one where you only do two things. You just stand and then you shoot. They destroy the pace the rest of the game sets up, and they just shouldn't exist here. There's one special encounter with a sandworm which isn't great. You shoot its weak point and it squirms around a lot and can possibly fling you seemingly by a glitch if you're in a vehicle or a mech very far. It's just annoying. The thing never stops moving and it feels so bad to fight against. I'm shocked this was apparently added post-game, meaning they had time to work on this thing past launch and thought this was okay. There are a few more bosses in the game, but due to their story significance, we'll talk about them in their own section. Difficulty. Difficulty was handled awfully in this game and it's not even funny. Now, normal difficulty is fine. It feels it was made for those new to fast-paced movement shooters. But when you move up from that, you notice it wasn't handled like Doom Eternal. It was handled like Fallout 4. And to anyone who's played both of those games, you'd understand why this is concerning. You see, Doom Eternal's difficulty is fitted to give you a fair challenge. The enemies get more aggressive and their damage goes up, but their health doesn't change. This way, everything stays viable and it keeps the fast-paced nature of the game going. In Fallout 4 and most Bethesda games like that, their difficulty is moving up the health and damage sliders. In those other games, it's annoying, but it's relatively fine. But in a movement shooter like this, it causes the game to cannibalize itself. Most of the guns, which may I remind you, already weren't the best, might as well shoot BB pellets on this difficulty. On higher difficulties, like I said earlier, Shatter doesn't ragdoll enemies, turning it from an efficient tool to insta-kill small enemies and armored guys to a minor inconvenience for them. Slam goes from an amazing room clearer to a weak distraction. Then there's the enemy's damage scaling, which makes it feel like hell in certain areas. I want to remind you again, this isn't Doom. The enemies aren't shooting colorful fireballs or reactable energy blasts. They're shooting bullets from rifles, and there's a lot of guys with rifles. Your time to kill is very short, and if they hit you longer than 0.2 seconds, you're dead. If you're in a large vehicle, even a tank, if they hit you a few times, you'll die. It will leave you frustrated multiple times, and not in the way of you feeling like you made a skill mistake on your end, but more so in a really unfair way. RPG mechanics and powering up. Some may be wondering what I mean by this. You see, Rage 2 has a lot of upgrades and weapons you can unlock. Everything I've talked about except the pistol and rifle has to be unlocked from an arc, a big building sphere in the open world. My only problem with these are none except for the shotgun is mandatory. This in itself isn't necessarily an issue, but it becomes a problem when you fight any of the bigger enemies and you notice you're woefully unequipped. As I mentioned in the earlier section, if you fight these big brute guys with no rocket launcher, they could be some of the most grueling fights in game, taking practically, if not all of your resources to kill it. I understand rewarding exploration, but the fact that the story puts you against 4 or so big bosses like this, and there's a possibility you could just not have any heavy weapons to deal with them, was a horrible design choice. It makes all the arcs go from optional upgrades to pretty much mandatory to stand a chance. You may think you can just skip the ones that don't matter to you and grab the weapons you do like, but in the vein of this game, to be randomly fickle with its decisions, there's no indicator in game to actually tell you which arcs contain which weapon or upgrade, meaning unless you Google everything you want, you're most likely going to waste your time getting things you don't actually have any interest in. And needing to go to a resource outside of the game just to get certain things you should have run into on the main path anyways feels rough. This whole aspect of the game just feels awkwardly handled, for lack of a better word.
I mentioned in the last section how you need to find these arcs in the open world. The open world here is very reminiscent of Ubisoft's open world design philosophy. 2% of the game is little towns you can shop at, 8% is small little locations and areas for you to explore, 10% is boss fights with the authority sentries or the other large mutants, and the remaining 80% are variants of outposts. Arcs, roadblocks, mutant nests, and everything else are just variations of combat arenas. While not necessarily a bad thing, as this is a movement shooter, so you're pretty much going to want to be shooting as often as possible, it does leave the world feeling pretty barren once you near finish the game. But to throw Bethesda a bone here, the world design is gorgeous. For a PS4 game, it looks amazing, and the world changing from a basic wasteland to a thick swamp to a desert makes you really feel like you're going on this region-spanning journey. But let's talk about how you get through that amazing spanning world. Vehicles. Vehicles, for the most part, are really weird to control. If you're going too fast, it's nigh impossible to turn the damn things. There will be times where you'll set a marker on your minimap and begin following it, for it to then give you a sharp turn literally no vehicle in the game is even capable of making, leading to you crashing into random things anytime you need to hard turn to the left or right. And not even including that, the collision in this game is generally weird. Sometimes you hit minor bumps and it'll send your vehicle out of control entirely, flip it over, or sometimes just bring it to a complete stop, even if it's a tank. Water heavily slows down pretty much all the vehicles here. So when you reach the swamp, one of the regions in this game, it's hard to navigate because on top of that, there's so many random bumps and shrubs littering the area. This is especially poorly timed because if you're playing this game normally, this will most likely be the final region for you, meaning the open world as a whole will end on a low note. There's also vehicle combat. It's fun and cool when it works and you're not dealing with all the other problems I mentioned, but I don't really have much else to say about it. Now you may notice I've been saying most vehicles. There is one vehicle in the game that is leagues above the others, and that's the Icarus. The Icarus is the one and only flying vehicle in this entire game. The fact that it can just float over and ignore everything else I mentioned makes it so much easier than using any of the other vehicles. I don't know why you'd use them after you unlock this. The story is pretty generic, all things considered. There's obvious good guys, which are your fellas, and obvious bad guys, which are the authority. Not much nuance unless you want to read dozens of data logs scattered around. It's not bad or anything, but it feels like another story in a shooting game with one or two quotable moments, and not anything stand up. Its worst crime, though, is heavily wasting characters. Your sister-type character only has 2 cutscenes in the entire game, and later you end up on a mission to gather 3 important individuals, but they also only get like 2 or 3 scenes before they disappear. And past their first appearances, they most likely won't even be on screen and just call you. This game is quite lengthy if you blaze through it. It's around 10-ish hours, but if you're a completionist, it can be around 30-ish. You may wonder how there are so few story cutscenes in a game that long, and it's because a majority of the missions are just the outposts. Usually because one of the 3 leaders will tell you they're working on something, and this is a colorful way to tell you to clear out outposts until you hit level 5 with them, to which they'll give you their second quest, which will usually have you fight against the authority in some base. This makes it so a majority of the story quests are just you technically dicking around and clearing outposts instead of actual proper missions. It really makes the story feel like an afterthought at times, something duct taped onto the gameplay to the point where it's not hard to forget about it entirely sometimes. And I feel the authority really pay for this decision. They're relegated to only those 8 or so story-based missions, meaning most of the game you won't even be fighting them, but just the random raiders and mutants of the wasteland. The only real presence they have in the open world are the turns, which, like I said, are the worst fights in the game, so you'll most likely want to avoid them. It's hard to feel like they're this pressing world issue when you barely see them. This makes me especially upset because while I said they are generic, their leader, General Cross, is probably one of my favorite characters here. His design and line delivery really made me enjoy him as our main villain, and we only get to see him a few times. Now what about the story exclusive bosses? Not including the giant mutant or the mech mutants that they recycle from the open world, the things that are meant to punctuate this journey. Well, the first is Cross himself, which unlike all the other bosses I complained about, he's pretty fun. It seemed like the devs thought that their fast-paced game deserved an actual fast-paced fight. Cross is pretty much able to keep up with you with his own powers, with things like blade arms, boosters, and wrist guns. It's such a far cry from all the other shitty bosses, it was a pleasant surprise to run into. Unfortunately, it's the only good boss fight in base game. The next time we see Cross in person is the final fight. They hype you up as if you're gonna fight him again, to which a big ugly mutant known as the Colossal Titan, no not that one, appears from under him and you have to fight it. And this is genuinely one of the worst boss fights in the entire game. game. You have to stop and wait for him to slam his hand down so you can shoot his weak points, while he'll occasionally shoot rockets down at you. It's embarrassing and almost feels like baby's first boss fight. And maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if he didn't have so much health. It takes so fucking long to kill this thing on higher difficulties, it's actually insane. To be fair, this thing is shown in foreshadow in the first cutscene and once before in the Cross fight, but I guarantee you most players were focused on Cross and not the generic ugly monster behind him. And to go from the best boss fight hours earlier to this was disappointing. And like the level design at the swamp, it ends the game on a relatively low note. Now that we're done with the base game, let's talk about the DLCs. Cult of the Death God hardly counts as additional content. You can beat it in like 20 or so minutes, as it's only one mission. You go to a cave and do a mutant nest like normal, before you run into Nicholas Rain's armor, the protagonist from the first game, and a unique mutant who fights you with a street light. I'd tell you about the fight itself, but honestly, I couldn't even tell you what he was doing. Mutants were flooding in and I could hear his street light, but even on Ultra Nightmare difficulty, which is what I normally played on, he hardly did anything himself, which is a shame because he does have a unique design. After you beat him, you get Nicholas Rain's armor and the Settler pistol, and neither of these are great, to be honest. Rain's armor looks particularly bad. Since practically the entire game is in first person, all you're really gonna be seeing is Walker's gloves, and I don't know, he kinda looks like a bum wearing it. I know his base outfit isn't necessarily something unique, but I like the style of it way more than this suit. Also, something else I find funny is they implemented an option to switch outfits, to then only have the base armor and Nick's armor being the only two sets, which is kind of a waste, but it is what it is, I guess. Then there's the Settler's pistol. Honest to God, toss this thing in the garbage. The design is interesting, but it's the weakest gun in the game, even below the starting pistol you get. You may think you can at least level it up to make it better, but this thing has no upgrades at all, causing it to just be a waste of a weapon slot. The only other thing added in this was the monster truck, which I guarantee you most people don't even use the thing, and it was thrown in to justify a purchase. So long story short, everything here kind of felt like a miss. And considering this cost as much as the next DLC we'll be talking about, it feels a little bit overpriced, since everything you walk away with is kinda dog shit.
Your flesh, it can only take so much.
You may be wondering why I don't cover the Rise of Ghost DLC first, considering that is the first DLC. It's because the content difference is so drastic, I feel like I have to. Terramania feels like a Borderlands quest that got lost in the wrong game. Now the base game does have a few goofy moments, mostly just the first MTV encounter, but this DLC starts off with a disc going the wrong way and sucking the player into an alternate dimension. It's a really weird choice for this game, but nothing to really complain about. But then you start the DLC, and you will definitely have some emotion towards it. First, the enemies of this DLC are an army of the dead. Skeletons of every faction you fought so far mashed into one group. Something similar to the Taken for You Destiny folks. Given this was the final DLC, it does add a nice bit of challenge dealing with all these guys at once. The problem is the arenas. You see, in the base game, the battle arenas are a bit more congested than something like Doom's, but not to the point where I'd complain about them. Here, past the first encounter, it feels like any double dash you do will end up with you smacking into a wall. So while visually the areas are pleasing, they are hands down the most irritating ones to fight in the entire game. Maybe that I've ever played in a movement shooter, honestly. Hell, one level consists of alleyways you can hardly dodge down, and another one is a room that shrinks with two big bosses in it. It's like it was intentionally made to be annoying. This issue is 1000% amped by the fact that this DLC doesn't feel like it's balanced for higher difficulties at all. In the entire base game and both the other DLCs, I beat them with great difficulty, but it felt doable. Here, I literally don't believe you could beat this on Ultra Nightmare without cheesing it. There's so many enemies. The enemy types being mashed up doesn't particularly matter to me, but the first area of this DLC has a longer gauntlet than anything in the base game. Everything two-taps you. The areas, as I said, are frustrating, and to top it off, you have to fight 4 mini-bosses in this gauntlet before a huge boss, with no checkpoint in between. It's the most annoying thing I think I've played in a long-ass time, as it doesn't feel like there's anything you can do about any of this. Honestly, I still think it's a miracle that I even beat the first section of this on Ultra Nightmare, but as I said earlier, it felt like it was the only one designed by someone who played anything in this genre before. You may be wondering what else there is to do in this DLC other than combat. Nothing! You're sent here to reassemble that disc I mentioned earlier, but aside from the narrator, you barely speak to anything else that happens in this DLC. So it's really just an excuse for the hardest enemy clumps in the game, which as I just said have very obvious problems. But there was also a weapon added, a sword. Laying on its Doom sister project yet again, the sword here is interesting. Just like everything else, it's a bit clunky to use. So, like everything else, it's worse than the shotgun, but it does have potential to be pretty decent. You see, the sword levels up the more gauntlets you beat here.
At the start, it's pretty dog shit, being nothing more than a cooler melee attack. However, by the end, it has some unique properties. Most of them, I'd argue, aren't great. You get a dash slash, which is cool, but the fact that it replaces your dash and auto homes in on enemies can leave you in some really weird positions and makes it awkward to use. The sword makes you use shatter from it instead of your palm, which for me made Walker be far back enough where all it would do is lightly nudge the enemies over. You get a bullet deflect block attack, but for some reason, deflected bullets don't hurt enemies. This is probably the most disappointing aspect of it, because that small touch of the enemies dying from your deflect would have made this easily my favorite weapon in the game. Also, even with what they have here, it's a bit finicky as once you're deflecting, you're locked into that animation and you can't do anything until Walker puts the sword down. So you can't use it smoothly alongside anything else. Where it gets good is its other two abilities. It gets a chargeable gravity slash that freezes enemies in air. It's fine, it can stop a large amount of enemies from advancing towards you, but again, like before with the vortex ability, it's kind of hard to hit them in air, and you're most likely going to get shot by other enemies if you try to swat them out of the air with your sword. But its crowning ability is its charge slash. If you hold R2 for a second, you get the ability to shoot an energy beam that goes through enemies until it hits a wall, and can 3-shot enemies on Ultra Nightmare. Let me remind you, this weapon has no ammo cost, and this move has no cooldown. No other gun can straight attack through walls of enemies like this, so this one aspect of it makes it one of the best weapons in the game. It's a shame it's the only amazing aspect of it, but it's still the best feature of this DLC as a whole. A sword ending up somewhat strong but outclassed by normal weapons due to an odd caveat in a Bethesda shooter. I wonder what they were prepping for. Anyways, I think the worst part of this DLC is the end. To which, I'll just show you my live reaction.
Oh no, you did not just put the credits in a still shot.
That's right. A small animation of a spinning disc followed by a hard cut to an image. It feels like Bethesda's budget for this game just ran out at this moment, and it felt really tacky. Again, another example of this game ending on its lowest point, especially since this was the last DLC this game got.
The Feltrite's coursing in my blood!
Rise of Ghosts is probably the best thing to ever happen to this game. First off, it starts with you getting kidnapped, talking to this mysterious figure named Iris, who, as you can see in the cutscene, is another ranger, and as such, she has your abilities. Within her first introduction, she is immediately more interesting than Cross. Don't get me wrong, as I said, I love him, but he's a bit more on the generic side. She seems a bit more complex in her motivations, as she wants to bomb the main wasteland with Feltrite bombs, forcibly mutating them, but also giving them, in her words, the power, strength, and security her and Walker have. And she doesn't even really want to hurt you, telling you to go away and let her finish her plans, purposely leaving you alone for the beginning half of this DLC. Later on, once we step on her toes enough, we get our first boss fight with her, and it's good. As I said earlier, she's a ranger, meaning that she has practically all of the abilities you have. She dashes around, will dodge bullets if you don't stun her first, uses vortex to jump up and shoot you. She even knows the meta and only uses the shotgun. It's probably the best fight in the entire game. And after all that, it turns out the fight was a distraction so she could go destroy the main hub of the game. This is the kind of shit Cross needed to do. While he does kill Prowley at the start of the game, past that point, he doesn't do much to us actively while we play. With Iris destroying the hub we've been to multiple times during this campaign, and seen bustling with life, it really catches you off guard. Unfortunately, someone at Bethesda is allergic to good storytelling, so everyone survives this, but it's a really good scene to show how much of a threat she really is. And a bit of gameplay after that, we get to our final encounter with her. And unlike Cross, this fight doesn't turn into a slogging waste of time that makes the DLC end at its lowest point. It's a repeat of the earlier Iris fight, but she has access to a few more abilities. She seems to have more health, tosses wing sticks at you, will use shatter and ground pound. Hell, once you get her to half, she triggers overdrive. And once you defeat her, remembering that she has all the abilities you have, she uses the defibrillator on herself, causing the fight to continue. Some may say that it's lazy to have the second phase of the fight be pretty much identical to the first, but considering it's the best fight in the entire game, I didn't particularly mind it. After her defeat and attempting to stop you one last time, you both talk for a second in a real nice but simple cutscene of Walker walking towards her as she bleeds out, further emphasizing how Iris doesn't really hate you, she just thinks your methods of saving the wasteland is naive. Afterwards, she asks you as the only other ranger to sit next to her until she eventually bleeds out, leading to you both sitting down and looking out over the city. It's probably the best scene in the game, and the only time I can say this game really ends at a high point. To somewhat get off of the subject of just her alone, she leads a new faction of enemies known as the Ghost, which are very distinct from the base game factions, as they'll use some of your abilities against you. They'll dash and use their wing sticks in their fights, which helps differentiate them from all the other humanoid enemies in the game.
which also helps is unlike the Terramania skulls, they're actually balanced. Sure, the rifles still do normal Ultra Nightmare damage, but the wing sticks, which are known for homing in, still only do a small bit of damage, meaning they hinder your movement when they hit you, but they won't just home in and obliterate 50% of your health on hit. We also got a new power and weapon. The power is Void, which I mentioned at the start of this video. It's cool, and while I initially thought it was a waste of a slot, it can actually be pretty helpful. You can use it to grab the last enemy of whatever arena you're in and get free health back, or you can use it as a free way to fling any nearby enemy on any difficulty, meaning you can usually one-shot enemies even on Ultra Nightmare with it. The cooldown's not bad either, meaning it'll most likely become a key part of your arsenal once you get good at using it, though I do wish it was implemented differently. This is more of a nitpick, but Void seems like a very villainous kind of power to use. You hold someone until their head explodes. When I saw it, I imagined he'd learned it from an Iris fight, as it seems like something she would do. But no, she doesn't even have access to the move. And the way you get it is the same way you get access to any other ability, through an arc. Again, not a DLC ruining thing, but it seemed like wasted potential. As for the gun, it's alright. It's functionally a death laser with infinite ammo as long as you kill enemies. It can kill quite fast, even on Ultra Nightmare. So while like most, it's not as good as the combat shotgun, it's pretty decent. Now, despite this DLC being my favorite thing out of the entire game, the other new enemy type is a recycled reskin of the mutants. And while I thought they were a cool concept, they only get 1 or 2 lines talking about them. The characters other than Iris are kind of like the base game. Not bad, but pretty generic. The way this story is handled is a bit clunky, as like before you need to rank up in the faction by doing combat arenas and stuff like that, and then pass a hub city to trigger new dialogue. While this is pretty easy to make happen in the base game since there's quite a few cities that you'll walk in and out of, this DLC only has 1, meaning if you're good at the game and don't need to restock much, you might be really confused on how to continue the main plot, as I was clearing out places left and right before I finished the DLC, I had done every combat spot to continue the story before I bothered going back to the main hub. Overall, I think Rage 2 is a good game. Some people may say it's a Doom Eternal pretest, which in some regards I do agree with, but at the same time I feel it's unfair to boil the entire game down to that. There's so much attention to detail and unique mechanics, it feels like it has its own identity. However, I feel everything was just mismanaged. For every single cool, amazing aspect of it, it has one part that really weighs it down. And that really pains me because it's so obvious those working on it cared. From the mountains of data pads to fill in the world's lore, the amount of detail on all the models in game, how good the graphics and cutscenes tend to look. It feels like with a few tweaks, this would have been one of the best movement shooters of the year. But due to some odd design choices, it just got stuck at being a good game. And that really pains me to say. Most games I play for review, I beat them once and then delete them off of my system and begin right. But with Rage, I kept playing more and more of them, and I kept noticing more little details that made me love it despite its flaws. But as for you guys, if you like movement shooters, I recommend you at least give it a try. It's relatively cheap nowadays, and I even heard it was free on Xbox Game Pass, so I'd recommend you play it. It's not a game for everyone, but I'm pretty sure many could find something to enjoy here like I did. Anyways,
This is going to be a weird video to me. EDF is a series I got into completely by accident. One day I opened my PS3 and EDF4 just happened to hard install itself onto my console. I genuinely had no idea what it was, so I played it once. Saw the big bugs and closed it because I felt like it was such a random ass game. Cut to years later, and due to sheer boredom, I picked up the game again. But this time, I fell into it hard. The overly goofy plot, the scope of the battles, the Air Raider class as a whole, it just clicked. Somewhere down the line I ended up getting 5, and 5 was such an improvement from 4 it was almost unbelievable to me. It was pretty much the same game but better and improved on practically every aspect. Pretty much all you'd ever want from a sequel. Also, Bargo was awesome. I didn't beat either of these games, but it wasn't due to lack of interest, it was just because there was a lot to do. I think I was at level 70 or so of EDF4, and level 100 of EDF5. They aren't perfect games in my mind, but they knew their charms and were always enjoyable to sit down and play. Cut the current year where Helldivers comes out. But seeing as I didn't have any next generation platforms when it came out, I couldn't play it. But it reminded me of EDF for reasons I'm sure you could imagine. But I didn't want to just jump into 4 or 5, as I was definitely in the harder sections of those games, and that'd be a bit of an investment to remember how all my stuff worked. I wanted something fresh. Due to me having PS Plus Extra for a little while longer, I noticed I had access to the other spin-off games. EDF Iron Rain and EDF Cube Patrol, or whatever the fuck the other one was called. The only thing I knew about the Cube World looking one is that Sea-Dog VA is in it and it's blocky. It didn't really draw my attention. But EDF Iron Rain, I'd heard things about it being bad and one of the worst in the franchise. Though I didn't remember hearing a concrete reason for those claims. Usually I like to experience things for myself and draw my own opinion.
as I'm sure you could tell from me liking Dark Souls 2, which depending on where you say out loud, you could get stoned. So I installed this game, and I have so much to say about it. So now, I'm here making this video. EDF Iron Rain is not a badly made game. There's a lot of things that it did I kinda love. For instance, a character creator. It's limited, but it's nice to be able to stand out a bit aside from just coloring like the base games. The graphics are fantastic, especially for this series. Pretty much everything regarding the Prowler class. Unironically, sticking an Attack on Titan-like class in this series is something I never knew I needed. But writing the bugs? Genius. There's some overall better movement and defensive tweaks for most of the classes, and a lot of the small stuff like that, I feel they did really well. My problem is with the bigger picture stuff. It made some fundamental changes and choices to differentiate itself from base EDF, and it's in those changes I feel 99% of my problems come from. One of the biggest changes to this game is it's not a looter shooter. You only get 3 or so weapons per mission. So unlike the previous titles, you're not checking over your huge haul and finding what you like. You choose from a few scraps they decided to give you and you work off of that. This is a real make or break change that I feel immediately turned a lot of people off before they could even get into it. This didn't really bother me initially, as I assumed it was, again, just a change to differentiate itself, but it led to a lot of situations I've never found myself in the other games. For example, after unlocking the Prowler class, I decided to use swords as my main weapon, as they feel amazing here. The problem was, the game wasn't giving me any swords at all. With how many weapons drop into the base EDS games, you'd usually have another weapon in the type you'd like to switch to. But here, I didn't get another sword until 20 or so chapters later. And due to the difference in the way you fought with it, I didn't even end up liking it. If you have a favorite weapon type here, it's very easy to fall into a drought for whatever class you like due to the stingy nature of getting weapons here. After beating the entire game, I think I only had 6 or so swords. And God forbid you think you can beat missions again to get 3 more drops, because the missions here don't work that way. Once you beat a mission on higher difficulties, that's all you're getting from it. And I'm sure someone could try and counterpoint me by bringing up how the doubled A rank weapons drop from certain enemy kill amounts, but that whole system is so confusing we have entire threads about it. There's a high chance you'll beat the entire game and not have a single A rank weapon. I beat the entire campaign on hard and my highest weapon was a B rank. It's all just so restrictive, and it really hampered a lot of the fun I had with this series. You might be wondering what I mean by grinding, since I just said you have to unlock weapons from level completions, mostly, so this shouldn't even be a concern. Well, you unlock the weapons by beating missions, but you don't own them. Once you unlock a weapon, you need to head to the store and buy it. These cost these blue, red, green, and gold points. If you're playing the game on normal, it's not that bad, but if you try to bump it up to hard before the final 20 or so levels of this game, the costs get outright ridiculous. They can be a few thousand of each kind of currency. And you don't deal with enough enemies for the first or middle half of the game for you to naturally have enough of these currencies to buy these weapons. Meaning, if you want new weapons you already have unlocked, you have to farm older missions again and again. And a lot of the fun of redoing missions here is just sucked away. As like we just went over, you can't get any new weapons from them. For reasons we'll get to, for me personally, replaying missions I've already completed a few times just to be able to use one weapon I should already have is kinda miserable. This goes back into the whole I need to wait 20 or so missions for a weapon thing I said before. On one level I got stuck and needed a strong sniper, preferably one with automatic reloading, since on Prowler I'd be using my sword most of the time anyway. But due to this necessary grinding you have to do, I think it took me 30 minutes to an hour to get the resources to get the sniper I wanted to help me complete the main game. Not a very fun situation, as I'm sure you can imagine. Maybe waiting so long or pushing through the game without weapons you like isn't such a bad thing. After all, these games are pretty long and you'll have multiple chances to unlock new weapons, right? This is the shortest EDF game, clocking in at 52 levels with no DLC. And I'm sure you can imagine with both of the points I mentioned earlier, this really doesn't help. Going 10 or so missions without a weapon you actually want to use means you've gone 1/5 of the game without a weapon you like. This weapon system as a whole really plays against the game's length. As for the first 20 or so missions, you'll use whatever is fun, but towards the end game, as I just went over, you'll be grinding, waiting to get better weapons, etc. Moving off of the weapon system plague that affects every aspect of this game's length wouldn't be such a problem if they cut the fluff and gave us some really good missions. But this game didn't make that feel like it was the case. They all felt pretty standard, all things considered, if not pretty annoying. What doesn't help is to compensate for so few levels being in the game, they made a lot of them unnecessarily long. So many missions here, you'll fight a good chunk of enemies, and where it naturally feels like it should end, you'll hear the comms cut on and say, here comes the second wave. Past a certain point of playtime, any mission I'd play and hit a logical point I felt it should end, I would just sit back and go, here it comes, as without fail, they'd always have some weird continuation. And in some cases, it does this multiple times in the same mission. My next 2 points go along with what I'm about to say. As I'm sure you can notice, a lot of my issues here weave into each other. The enemies in this game both lack variety and happen to be some of the most annoying across the entire series for me. Now usually in these games, you'll have a wide variety of enemies to go against. I'm sure if you've played EDF 4 or especially 5, you'd understand this. Iron Rain feels like you're fighting only a handful of the same enemies across the entire game. Not including special variants, there's only 14 or so enemies here, which is pretty limited in comparison to the others. But even what they do have here feels underused. It feels like 90% of the game you're fighting ants, scorpions, or Rasnid larvae. The spiders here immediately come to mind, as I felt like they were hardly in the game past the first thing. And oh my god, the amount of missions where the main targets are just dropships spewing out some of the most irritating enemies towards the end game is ridiculous. One of the final missions in the game might as well just be called Dropships the Level, and as you could guess, it's one of the most mental endurance missions in the game with so much shit happening. I unironically wouldn't be surprised if you could get a seizure from it. Then to talk about some of the bigger bosses for a second, Bilal is our Godzilla type for this game, which, I don't really feel anything towards him. Urginus and the Rolling Monster from 5 had some charm to them. Both their designs were pretty goofy and stood out. Bilal looks like a bloodborne creature by comparison, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, just he's probably my least favorite large monster of the group that they have. The other thing is usually these guys tend to be hyped up. Everyone practically shits their pants over Urginus appearing in EDF 4. In your first fight with him in 5, you have an entire army besides you. Archelius is introduced right after you beat Urginus, and everyone's shocked to see another huge monster exist. This was a sudden but sufficiently hyped up encounter in the game. Bilal just kinda shows up and you deal with him. While I think fighting him is neat, I guess, especially with the Prowler class, the game doesn't exactly do its best to make him leave an impact. Hell, you casually killed 2 of them in the same mission with an airstrike. While with both Urginus or Archelios, it felt like you could hardly stop them. I get they probably wanted to save the hype for just Rasnid, but the other 2 weren't the main focus of EDF 5 either and didn't seem to have a problem there, so I don't know, it just felt a bit mishandled for me. Gargant was actually one of the worst early boss fights in any EDF game. Maybe in any game I've played in a while. As we've established, early game is pretty painful due to you having no weapons. So what would be the worst thing you could do to exacerbate this issue? A boss awful to deal with unless you have certain weapons. Gargant is huge. You'll need weapons with decent range to even reach any of his weak spots, or a class that can get close to them. An issue with this is that this happens to be the mission where you unlock the Fencer equivalent in this game. So when I was doing this mission, I didn't have any weapons that did decent damage or that could reach him, meaning unless I grinded, Ranger and Fencer were practically unusable here. So I had to switch to the Air Raider equivalent, and if you think this makes the fight better, think again, cause it is a cluster of annoying aspects. First, it itself is constantly shooting shit at you from its legs until you break them, which is somewhat annoying. Then you're surrounded by aggressors, who will also be taking pot shots at you. Then you'll be surrounded by scroungers that are here from spawn and come out of the Gargant's legs. Overall, this fight made me question if I wanted to keep going. It was probably my most miserable point with the game. And then they make you fight him twice. And the second time is arguably worse. So you're defending this ship, which happens to be the EDF's base, and a Gargant climbs on the base and is blasting things at it. You have to defeat it before it destroys the ship. And he even leaves his weak spot open most of the fight. Problem is, this thing bumps out so much damage, if you get distracted for a moment, there's a good chance you lose. I lost this mission 5 or so times just due to how high his damage and health are. This shit's miserable. One time I even beat him, and right as he was dying, the ship exploded anyway. This thing just has no good encounters, and I wouldn't mind if he just wasn't there. I guess after talking about them, that leaves us with Raznid and the final boss. Raznid looks cool. Unironically, he might be one of the coolest large monsters they've made. He doesn't dip into the meant to be creepy aspect of Balal, but he doesn't lean hard into the goofy green Godzilla side of Urgens. He's a nice in-between, and I like his design. Gameplay-wise, I think he got the short end of the stick. You don't really fight Raznid, not traditionally anyway. In his first encounter near the start of the game, you're shooting this little energy dongle that comes out of the hive ship that's controlling him. And the dongle only has a few hits of health if you're using a sniper. So it doesn't really feel like a boss fight and more like a cool scene. And your next real encounter with him is at the end of the game. He does show up a few times before that, but he just spawns some guys and leaves, and you can't even hurt him, so they're not worth talking about. I love the setting of this second encounter being a destroyed city and just the general vibe of it, but again, it's not really a direct fight and it's more of a gimmick or unique encounter. You don't walk on the ground and fight with him or fight him off like how you do every other large encounter. Just like before, he's mostly out of bounds and you pop shots at him. But instead of it being an energy dongle you shoot this wound he gets from the cannons. But you don't really do this to kill him. The point of this fight is stalling until the main ship's cannon can fire, to which on the second shot of it, he immediately dies. It's not bad, visually it's really cool, but it's kind of lackluster fight-wise. And I feel the game knew that, so they make him get up and mutate, which honestly, I was going to put the game down because I was so mentally done with it at that point. But anyways, this leads into our final boss, Mutant Raznid, and he's fine, I guess. I don't much care for his design. His attacks are alright. Overall, he's just pretty mediocre. Every other big fight in EDF, you see the city and streets being trampled as you fight these creatures, and it really helps show the weight of what you're doing. Hell, even in the Barga fight with Archelios, you're smacking him through buildings. Mutant Raznid doesn't even move and just shoots shit at you while having a mountain of HP, it felt. It's just a pretty mediocre fight you might find memorable due to setting and nothing else. At least although base Raznid was a letdown to fight, the game hyped him up. The mutant version of him just happens. No build up or anything. Just once you finally beat Raznid, he's shot by the Hivecraft that's only showed up 3 times in the entire game, and you're fighting it all of a sudden. It just felt so sloppily integrated. This was briefly mentioned in my positives, but can also become really frustrating towards the endgame due to both the things we just discussed, being level design and enemies. Iron Rain's focus is definitely on faster combat. All the classes feel faster or has something to compensate for faster combat encounters. On paper it sounds great, but in game it's miserable at times. Let's talk about my beloved Prowler. Able to swing from creatures and walls of buildings. They're fun when they work, but when they don't, it is so frustrating. Your discount 3DM gear is your engager and escaper, so if you flat out can't use it, you're fucked in certain scenarios. Problem is the wire cuts if you're getting hit, something gets in front of you in the wire, or sometimes it'll just refuse to latch onto buildings. Now I'm sure you can imagine how all these scenarios could happen often. EDF is a game with tons of enemies. So if you're on ground level, it's not crazy to see an ant or something cut your line. If you're using the gear to move, you're probably trying to get away from being hit. Sometimes it's annoying to see yourself get staggered or barely scuffed, just for it to cut your line and lead to you getting destroyed in 0.5 of a second. And as for the latching thing just not working, I can't say much about it. Mainly on dropships and certain buildings, it'll sometimes work and sometimes just refuse to. Fencer, or as they're called in this game, Heavy Striker, is cute, but doesn't feel realistic in this game. You get a forwards-facing shield that negates all damage. But since you're so slow and threats towards the end of the game are so numerous, they practically always end up on top of you. And Fencer doesn't have any special knockdown or stagger resistance, so anytime I ran into a difficult mission I wanted to use Fencer on, I'd practically get stun locked. And even if you have your shield up and are fighting a large enemy, it can be irritating, as many heavier attacks stun your character and cause you to slide backwards, causing any weapons that have to wind up to restart. And overall, while it's probably there to show the weight of what you got hit with, sometimes you can get stunned from blocking so often it might as well just turn into Slide Simulator. Overall, they can be fun when they work, just oftentimes, especially at the second half, I personally felt I couldn't use them or that they were just a weaker option due to their limits. Wing Diver or Jet Lifter just feel a bit too slow to use here. They're very close to their EDF 4 counterpart. No, I didn't say 5, 4, which is the significantly worse option of the two. Though they have a few nice changes, their weapons aren't tied to their jetpack due to every class being able to use any weapon, and they get a dash that, while they can't shoot while dashing, covers a fair bit of ground. Overall, although I find Prowler fickle at times, with their speed and area coverage being so much better here, once I got them, I never really felt I wanted to play this class despite the fact I mained them in EDF 4 and 5. If they had the movement they had in 5, I'd probably play them, as I feel the speed they have in that game would translate well here, but that's not the case. Rangers pretty much just upgraded in this game. They're flat out better controlling than they are in any of the others. They get 3 short burst dodges they can do, and running doesn't feel weird like it does in 5. They are just the objective winners in this game. Though, I simply don't like playing Ranger. This is more of a personal thing, obviously, but their lack of vertical movement that the Wing Diver has, and their lack of heavy damage that the Fencer has, made me never really want to play them in any of the games. So I'm happy for whoever likes them, although that person isn't me. And I'm sure this is where you expect me to talk about the Air Raider, but they don't exist in this game. Their kit was retooled into items any class can use. At first I was a bit annoyed by this, as even in single player I still played them in 5, but here I feel it makes sense. I'm not really sure how you would translate them into this game other than making them a shittier version of the Ranger with more slots. This game is interesting. It feels like it tried to do what Dark Souls 2 did. Put a spin on the base gameplay, focusing on different aspects. While base EDF focuses on both the action, RPG, and looter shooter aspects, Iron Rain focused more on the action, and while it still has the other bits, they definitely aren't as prominently focused on here. And it's a change I feel me and a majority of the player base didn't really gel with. As the perfect mesh of all of those aspects, I feel is what made EDF, well, EDF. Though at the same time, I can see why many can and do defend this game, as it focused on an aspect they personally like or wish was tuned up the most. Do I think it deserves to be as frowned upon as it is? No. I think it's a spin-off and it should have the freedom to switch up things a bit. But do I understand why it's looked at the way it is? Yeah, the differences alongside a lot of the things I mentioned here that aren't simply changes but just genuine issues made it really hard for me to enjoy this game. Would I recommend it? If you can find it for cheap, I'd recommend giving it a shot if you want a little spin on your normal EDF fare, but if you want something just like EDF 4 or 5, I'd probably skip this one, as you'll most likely walk away disappointed or annoyed, both of which I sort of felt while playing. But that's just my thoughts. What do you guys think? As always, as long as you're respectful, I'm glad to discuss with you in the comments, and I've been cut in M really quick. I just want to warn you that past this point, these videos get fairly old, and my audio mixing wasn't as good. Also, I was a little bit looser with curse words back then, because I wasn't monetized, and I was just kind of thugging it out through the mud, and I was also kind of young. So, that's just a little warning ahead of time. Onwards with the videos.
And today we're going to be talking about a game I never expected to make a video on, and honestly a game I didn't know existed until 2 months or so when I got it. Gungrave Gore. I'll admit, at first I only started playing it because I had PS Plus Extra and the cover was so edgy. I felt that it would make for a fun quick play. But the further and further I got into it, I felt it was such a unique experience it would be a waste if I didn't talk about it here. Originally I wasn't going to give this the standard segment by segment kind of reviews that I do, but I felt it would be unfair to the devs who seemed super passionate about this series and to their work if I just threw together a 5-minute script with me not digging into this as much as I could have. So, without further ado, let's begin the review. The combat here is probably the game's strongest point. It's a really simple arcade third-person shooter. You shoot, you melee, and you do flashy supers when things get really bad. There's a few other little mechanics like glory kills, grabbing enemies, and things like that, but those are the main 3 things you'll be doing. And the gameplay here is fun. It's simple, effective, and just kinda works when you want a chaotic but simple shooter. But I have some small complaints about it, like how all the information is dunked onto the player. They jammed the entire tutorial for how to play the game in the first level, and then like the short version of 3 things I just explained to you, in game it's shoved on your screen, interrupting the gameplay and forcing you to read a few pages with 5 or 6 sentences each, containing some terms you won't even understand yet practically every room you enter. It kind of felt like information overload off the jump, and since it's the only time the game really does anything this intrusive, it makes it start off kinda weak, and I feel some may drop the game here because they feel like they're studying instead of actually playing. And considering how simple this game is once you start it, it feels unnecessary to an extent. Speaking of unnecessary, some of the small mechanics aren't needed here, like at all. They give you the option to switch between automatic and manual firing, which in a game where you have to shoot this much, I don't see why manual is even an option. It does give you the ability to charge shots, but charge shots are so useless once you get past the tutorial, I never used them again after that. Having melee combos here was an interesting choice. I never really used any of them except for one chainsaw one, as there isn't ever a point where melee feels needed here. You can counter-argue me by saying you need it to break shields, but considering the supers also break shields and hit large areas, 90% of the time I just do them instead. And disregarding that, everyone you play as in this game has burst mode, which lets you do a shit ton of damage. On the off chance where enemies were close to me, I just immediately start shooting in burst mode and destroy them all in a matter of seconds. You can also learn to do some different things when you grapple enemies, but they feel unnecessary. Your throw and kill options are all you really need, and the other ones just do the same thing, if not worse. Moving on to supers, some of them just do no damage and don't feel worth it. Supers here work like how they do in fighting games. Here you have your level 1 supers all the way up to level 3. Towards the end of the game, level 1 supers do practically nothing to even basic enemies. Level 2s, besides from one specific one where you can slow down time, don't feel worth it, and the level 3s are fine, but some 100% feel better than others. Things like the rockets or the spinning slash immediately come to mind. The rockets are meant to be crowd control, but due to how they don't have any sort of targeting and just sort of hit a blanket area in front of you, there's a good chance they won't manage to kill anything at all, making it pointless. Especially when they also give you a sniper level 3 that already kills everything in front of you. The spinning slash level 3 isn't necessarily bad per se, but you also have the sniper I mentioned earlier, or the hyper cannon, which you can hold as you can aim. So it doesn't feel like it has a place in your loadout unless you find it cool looking. I find it odd that Grave has these problems with repetitive supers when you get halfway through the game you unlock Bungie, who only has 3 supers, but all of them do everything you need. A punch through shot, an AoE, and his level 3 just feels better than all of Grave's supers, efficiency wise. This last one's a bit more of a story point, but once you get halfway through the game, you get the ability to play as a third character, Quartz, who's been with you the entirety of the game. And as I'll get into, she's one of the better characters here story-wise. So I was excited for when I'd eventually get to play her. And she's by far the worst character in the entire game. Her shots suck, her melee combat focus doesn't feel good at all. After using burst with both Grave and Bungie to easily clear out swarms, having to punch through people and feel this much weaker isn't really ideal. And her 2 supers are just mediocre. And this is ignoring the fact there are quite a few things Bungie and Grave can do that she simply can't. I understand in the super special Switch version they managed to fully flesh her out and make her one of the many playable characters there, but for her to only be playable in one level, and that being the worst level in the game because they don't want to update this version with her Switch version, just feels rough to me. Keep in mind though, these are simply some small complaints. The combat overall works just fine, just there's some small things I feel were handled oddly. As even with those minor issues, once you get into a flow state in this game, it's really fun, and despite the fact the efficiency of some of Grave's supers can be called into question, they're all animated really well and never lose their punch or cool factor. At least for me. And before I cap off this segment, since I brought up the worst character in the game, I feel like I have to highlight the best one. Bungie, who you unlock halfway through the game, feels amazing. He's animated really well, like I said earlier, all his supers look good and are really efficient, and despite the fact I didn't want to like him when I had just started playing because I thought he was tryhard cool, he grew on me to the point that once I unlocked him, I never switched back to Grave my entire first playthrough. This isn't going to be me digging into a core problem, just something I find an odd choice. The Switch Special version, from all I've seen, is just far superior to the normal version in every single way possible. More characters, quality of life changes, combat improvements, everything. The fact that this wasn't released as a DLC pack or ported to anything other than the Switch is just a bit upsetting to me. I wouldn't mind buying the characters as that's new content, so that makes sense. But since everything else I've read is just overall superior to the base version, I find it odd that they sell a straight up inferior version of the same game. I get when special editions have skins and maybe I can even let multiple characters slide, but withholding simple quality of life improvements just feels weird. And again, even if they didn't let us play her all the time, that entire Quartz section would feel a lot better if they gave us her polished variant they made for the Switch edition in base. Oh boy, the Gungrave story. It leads to a lot to unpack. The plot here is messy. I'm gonna be honest, I could kind of follow what was going on, but after a certain point, it felt like things were happening for the sake of things happening. But hey, this is an arcade shooter. I wasn't coming here for the second coming of Dark Souls or anything with the plot. But I also wasn't expecting the awful voice acting. The voice acting here is so bad, it loops around to being kinda funny. Practically everyone here sounds bored or they don't want to wake up their parents by talking too loud. This game presents itself as the epic, edgy, badass game. So honestly, I was expecting everyone to be overacting in their performances, which I personally would have loved. But instead we got some sleeper ones here. Anytime the game wants to be serious, it just ends up being funny.
The Raven Clan, they screwed me over. Fuck that.
You need to force her into her superior form. Once you've killed her, use this tool.
Lesson learned, Brave. I underestimated you. Foolish pride almost cost me my life. Almost. Time to tip the scale in my favor.
There's only really 3 exceptions. Those being the English voice of Quartz, the lady boss you run into later, and the bald guy boss. Quartz's voice actor is just good. I don't have any funny quip to add on to it. She just seems competent in what she does.
Hey, isn't Big Lucian using her voice to control people? Like sound waves, vibrations, air pressure, liquid pressure. If she can control all that, maybe she can control the new pure seed as well.
The other lady and the bald guy seem like they're overacting just a bit,
But considering how ridiculous this game gets at times, I'd honestly prefer if more of the performances were like theirs.
the cutscenes range from fucking amazing to goofy in-game graphics. When they're in-game graphics, everyone kind of awkwardly shifts into positions. Grave will reuse a lot of animations he normally does in-game, and the models just look off. Some definitely got it worse than others, but everyone here looks like Unity store dolls. And combined with the voice acting we just talked about, you can imagine whatever they are attempting to get at is overwritten by how goofy things tend to look. Unless the scene is so over the top, it manages to push itself to still be cool, which is when I feel this game's at its strongest. But for the more cinematic cutscenes, of which there are only 3 of, they look so good they almost don't feel like they came from this game.
And I know this sounds like a dig, but I don't mean it in that way. They're really impressive and honestly look better than some of the cutscenes in mainstream games we get nowadays. You can tell a lot of effort was put into them, and it really shows.
The only real complaint I have here is 2 of them have bits that lag for some reason. And all of them have the issue of insane cutaways. A lot of cutscenes here start the moment a combat encounter ends or is about to begin, leading to some really awkward shifts between gameplay and scenes.
Okay. Crazy cutback.
All this together leads to it feeling like some sort of fever dream, but not in a bad way.
It doesn't feel as if the devs were lazy when they made this game. Just working with what they had caused things to come out like this. It led to me feeling something I haven't felt in a long ass time. That the devs genuinely cared. It's rough around the edges, but there's so many cutscenes, models, voice acted lines, etc. that you just wouldn't do if you didn't care about what you were making. Hell, if I showed someone the final fight cutscene with no context, they'd probably assume it's a AAA game. You may think this should have been in the combat section, but I feel you needed the information from both of the previous points to understand what I'm getting at here. As I said, all of them have some pretty shoddy voice work, but once you begin fighting them, some of them feel like the most fun parts of the game, which was really unexpected. Once you understand them, they feel like they have really fun and fair openings, projectile attacks that feel great to parry, and they require a bit of skill and concentration the rest of the game doesn't, as they require you to optimize your arsenal and decide when or where to do super attacks, making them really work for me. Prime example among them is Jensen's second phase, which mechanically feels so good I almost didn't believe he was in this game. Parrying his energy slashes is hard, but when you learn how to read him, you always have enough time to react to them if you're paying attention. His clones have enough health where they're difficult to deal with, but low enough to the point where if you utilize your bar, you can beat them instantly. His dive bomb attack is fun to avoid, especially so when he has his clones out, and when he misses it, he stays still long enough where you have an ample amount of time to get your damage in. And while I won't really get into the OST of this game, he has one of the best tracks here. I don't know how many people seeing this review have seen my others, but unironically, this fight feels like the Ishin of Sekiro. A fight so good that I'd probably reinstall the game just to do it again. Even looking at the footage of it writing the script, I kinda wanna reinstall the game. And to get off the point of combat, in their base forms they look like pretty generic goons, but when they transform I love pretty much all of their designs. They all look like tech-fused Resident Evil monsters, and it's an aesthetic I didn't really expect to like, though I do have 2 complaints about them overall. First, they tend to have a lot lot of follow-up or rapid attacks. As I said before, they are reactable, but if you get in a situation where you do end up getting hit, a lot of the follow-ups are just guaranteed to land, which on hard and even sometimes normal is an immediate game over from how much damage they do. It's a bit overly punishing sometimes in my opinion. Second, you noticed I said these bosses are good when you understand what they do. When you don't, they feel really unfair and it doesn't feel like you could learn how to deal with them naturally. There isn't a specific tell for what kind of projectiles you can parry, like color coding or something, as it's done in many other games. And many of the projectiles like that, if not parried, come out too fast to dodge or have any other reaction to. Hell, some of the things the bosses shoot at you require specific positioning to deal with, which can only be learned through game overs due to their high damage. It feels like the devs even kinda picked up on this, as once you go down, the game tells you bullet point by bullet point exactly how to deal with every move the bosses have, which to me is a bit cheap and the weirdest way to handle that kind of problem. I wouldn't recommend they change much about the bosses, as I think for the most part they work really well, but maybe once your shield breaks and you get hit a certain amount of times in quick succession, the damage would begin scaling a bit so they don't just instantly maul you. And as for when you can parry, if we don't want to do the simple color system where parryable attacks are a specific color like Cuphead, I think a sound cue would be nice. That way they don't need to throw off the character's color composition and can give players a good indicator. I understand this wasn't the longest review, but considering how simple the game is in comparison to what I normally talk about, I feel that just makes sense. Gungrave feels like a passionate love letter of a game. It's definitely not perfect and its flaws are very apparent, but you can tell their heart's in the right place. The boss fights and designs are great. The chaotic arcade-like gameplay is fun. The story feels absolutely ridiculous, but in the best way possible. In all these things combined, it's just charming. It can be a bit tedious if you played straight over long periods of times like many arcade games are, but even at its worst point, it never drops to, oh, this is unbearable, or really frustrating territory. It stays pretty enjoyable one way or another the whole way through. Would I recommend it? Yeah, but not at full price. As I said, it's a very simple game mechanically when you boil down all those text boxes. It's been on sale many times for like 20-ish bucks, and I'd recommend it around that price point. At the very least, it'll give you something fun to think back on like it did for me. But with that, Monstrum 2. Okay, so fun fact about this video in particular, I had wrote out an entire script and already edited a video for this, but due to a DaVinci Resolve update that hardly worked on my computer, the entire video got wiped and I can't seem to find the old assets, so here we are talking about it again. Anyways, let's actually talk about the game in the title. Monstrum 2 is a sequel to, well, Monstrum, a very popular horror indie game that came out a good few years ago. I'd be shocked if you hadn't at least passively heard about it a while ago, since a lot of big YouTubers were playing it, especially if you're here watching a video on it from me, who's also already made a video on it. For something as relevant as it was, you'd think the sequel dropping would be the series' second win, as a lot of YouTubers would probably want to jump back into the series because either A, it's a series they liked before, or B, realistically a series that brought them a lot of views. And it seems initially people were really interested in this game as you look at the views for the trailer, and especially factoring in the fact that this isn't a super huge game. But if you look at Monstrum 2 now, most of the relevant videos about it were made a good while ago. Finding videos about the game at this very moment is pretty much impossible. It seems like it's pretty much dead, even after the devs seem to keep updating it and patching it. Why is that? Well, I honestly think it breaks down into a few key factors that I have prepared here. The first point, this game should not have been called Monstrum 2. Monstrum 1 was a horror game set up in the corridors of a big ship named the Hisamaru. You seem to be the sole survivor of whatever happened on the ship, and your goal is to get off of it by any means necessary, with one of 3 monsters tailing after you. The main things I'd say it's known for is the claustrophobic nature of the ship, the RNG helping randomize every game, the monsters that encapsulate different fears, and the overall unique experience it was. Even now, I can't think of any game exactly like it. Now, Monstrum 2 is an asymmetrical Dead by Daylight type game. If you know what Dead by Daylight is or functionally plays like, you'll understand why this is a problem. It's in a completely different genre that doesn't facilitate or use any of the first game's strengths to its advantage. I'm not saying this in itself is a bad thing, but I'm saying when you make a numbered sequel, people will tend to expect more of the same kind of thing the first game established. Other than the fact that you're on a boat and need to escape creatures, there's pretty much no other overlap between these two titles. I can guarantee you this game would have done much better if they literally labeled it anything else. They could have kept Monstrum in the name, but it needed a subtitle, not a number. My second point is the weaknesses in game design really show here. What I mean by this is Monstrum 1 in itself wasn't necessarily a technical marvel. Hell, I think the game is barely 2 gigabytes. If you actually look at the game, it's not that visually impressive, but since they played into their strengths in the first game,
you wouldn't really notice how lackluster some of the things are. All of the animations are pretty janky looking. The monsters are pretty stupid to the point where you can throw glow sticks at the things and they don't even react. You can leave cabinets open and hide in them and they won't see you. It's a very flawed game, but most of these are things you wouldn't notice unless you look way deeper than normal people would. Monstrum 2's visual issues are a lot more apparent. The first person animations are a bit off. The humans in general look odd. They kind of look like blow-up dolls sometimes. And as for the monsters, they did get a significantly better bargain than the other assets, probably just because they're the main selling point of this game. But even then, some of them have odd things to them. Their death animations in general are very odd. Some of them sort of snap you into position. See that little dark speck? And others, like locker animations, have the flaw of the monster always needing to walk back in front of the locker afterwards to reposition the player. These are some of the best animations in game, but the awkward shuffle back to the door to close it after they kill someone kind of kills the momentum the animations tend to have. With Monstrum 1, you're usually too busy being scared to notice these sort of things. With Monstrum 2, it's almost apparent right out of the box, because the things that hid these issues aren't present in this game. What I will say is it seems better than when I initially wrote the first draft of this video a few months ago, because back then, even the monster textures didn't particularly look great, but even now, the overall problem of animations and models doesn't seem completely fixed for all sides. Our third point is they got rid of most of the main cast. Somewhat on the point of not playing into what they had, the only returning monster was Brute. The other two seem to have been sent to the Shadow Realm and got replaced by two new creatures. I don't particularly have anything against them adding new creatures into the roster, but they lack the icon power the other two had. Sure, the Brute was obviously the main star of the show as he was on the box, but after all of these years of Monstrum 1, I'm pretty sure many fans would have liked to see the other two return. I know at least I did. The oddest part is, though, I feel like they have interesting powers that would tie into this game. Hunter, I feel, doesn't even need to be explained. Demogorgon from Dead by Daylight pretty much has the exact kit I imagined the Hunter would. But instead of using the Upside Down to teleport, he'd use the egg sacs he teleported with in the first game. Or maybe even just use the vents to move up and down the ship. I doubt he'd need a lunge, but maybe give him some sort of cloaking ability to mimic the fact that he's translucent, and in the first game, it's kind of hard to see him sometimes. I imagine he'd be more of a technical monster, but again, as I just established, the assets form are pretty much shown to have worked in Dead by Daylight. Fiend is much more complicated to put into this game due to most of what he did in the first game was based in fear and him scaring you out of doing things. Something that doesn't really translate well into asymmetrical games like this. The main thing he would have that could transfer is his stunning look. Sure, you need to find some way to balance it, but I could see it working something like Clown's bottles in Dead by Daylight. Maybe make it look like some spirit projectile and the survivors have to dodge it. And for a transferal ability, let him float up and down the vine spots faster than the other monsters do. Or let him straight go up and down floors if the area is open enough. Now that I've suggested both of these ideas, that's probably actually a good way to implement him into this game. And my fourth and final point is, I don't understand why they've even decided to go with asymmetrical horror. I'm sure some of you are sick of me bringing up the game, but again, Dead by Daylight is the only game in this style that's worked. Literally every other competitor it's had in this space has fallen off. It appears to be a very hard space to establish yourself in unless you have something really unique. The king of the genre is literally the only known game in it. So the only way to keep any other game like it around is to be able to compete with it, since you're fighting for mostly the same audience. Monstrum 2 doesn't seem to have everything figured out to the point where it's even valid competition. Polish, the animation, the models, the gameplay, they don't seem to compare in any of these aspects. If you're a small indie group and you have your audience propping up your game for you, it's fine to not be the biggest game in the world, but due to the drastic shift in genre I mentioned earlier, because a lot of people won't even stick around to prop this game up because they didn't like how different it was and didn't even bother trying it. Overall, I don't think Monstrum 2 is a horrible gutter trash game. I think a lot of aspects of it were just handled wrong. And at the point the game is in now, even though the devs still updated, I don't see this ever getting a rebound that sweeps the nation. I think Studio Junkfish was simply out of their depth with this one, and it's kind of falling apart on them. Hell, in the last update they've done at the time of writing this, they added the old shit back from the first game. If any time would have brought life back into this game, it would have been now. But it seems like most people didn't even know the update if it came out, or B, forgot that the game exists as a whole by this point. I don't mean to sound like a downer on the entire situation, telling the independents to kill its project. It's just, unless they start shilling for big YouTubers to play it and it brings in enough people to make the game sustainable, it doesn't seem to make sense to pour more effort into this. As of now, it's hard to even find games due to how vacant the servers are, which is a real shame. But anyways, I just wanted to bring up this whole situation due to how much I actually like the original game. What do you guys think? Today, it's time to talk about the other Necromunda game. Seeing as my review for the other one blew up, which I definitely wasn't expecting, like, at all. Like, honestly, where the fuck did half of you guys come from? I thought it'd be worth talking about this one, as it is my favorite out of the two. Necromunda Hired Gun is a very interesting game. I really don't know how else to describe it other than a very jank Doom Eternal. As much as I don't want to call it that, it borrows so much from Doom Eternal, it's a lot easier to just say that so you know what you're dealing with. Fast-paced movement and combat, a grappling hook, double jump, quick weapon switching in the works. But when I say a jank Doom Eternal, don't confuse that with me saying it's bad. Honestly, one of the main draws to this game for me was its Doom similarities, as I haven't seen many other games like that on console. As for the jank part, even if you watch gameplay of it, you can tell it's not flawless. But since the core gameplay was close to that of a Game of the Year contender, I wasn't going to write it off immediately. And I'm very happy I didn't. Hired Gun does so many weird, unique things. It's fun to go through it all. Like, instead of your set Doom weapon wheel, this has a RPG looter shooter mechanic. So you'll be able to switch out your weapons to your liking. And it's nice to be able to use some of the more iconic Warhammer weapons like the bolter, plasma gun, or the grab gun, which is one of my personal favorites. Instead of having something like the flame belch or the blood punch, your character's partially robotic due to an incident that happens in the story. So you get upgrades with borderline game-breaking abilities, such as slowing down time, auto-aim, the ability to kill people in one swing or kick. It feels like a very weird early version of Cyberpunk modifications or something. But the best thing is, all of these can stack. You can slow down time and have Berserk, or slow down time and have auto-aim, which is incredibly broken, but really fun to use. It's fun to fuck around with all these weird options in combat, and it helps it stand out against all the other movement shooters. And on top of all that, you get a dog which turns into a Terminator near the end of the upgrade tree. And you get to see all these changes happen to him in real time. There's a weapon mod system. I'm not gonna lie to you and say it's super expansive or anything, but it can help you give your favorite guns a bit of an edge in combat or individuality. And in some weapons cases, it can change the entire way you play with them. But let's switch off of the gameplay for a moment. The areas nail the Warhammer feel in this game. And Underhive Wars, while it wasn't a complaint I made, since I didn't really think of it at the time, I will admit the backgrounds in that game were a bit forgettable. They all just looked pretty generic and dirty. These feel like they're in Warhammer specifically, with the grand scale of everything while also staying on the grimdark theme. If you've ever played Deathwing, it's about to that level of accuracy. The Genitorium being one of my favorite areas in video games in general, to be honest. Then there's the voice performance. I pointed this out somewhat in my Underhive review, but the female Protag's voice is legitimately one of the best performances I've heard in video games. It just sells the character, and I don't really have anything else constructive to say about it other than it's just really good.
Should we try that? Hey! Are you big lumps of stim blubber looking for some Orlock scum? I think I've found him. Come on over! He's all yours!
Now, last chance. Talk and you live.
Okay, now that everyone thinks I'm a raving fanboy, let's come down a bit with the negatives. As of course, no game's perfect. Just this one wears its imperfections on its sleeves. I'm sure if you've played the game, you'll most likely know what most of these negatives already are. Number one, those character upgrades that I mentioned earlier, like I said, it's fun to be broken, but for game balancing, not so much. When you're leveling alongside the story, it feels good, but once you cap or near cap all of your abilities, you're such a powerhouse it's hard for the enemies to do anything to you. Your cooldowns become so low that spamming everything is pretty much optimal. You won't even really need to aim your guns anymore, as everything in front of you is gonna melt in a matter of seconds. And even though there's some very limited post-game content, it'll be trivial due to how strong you are. Which, like in most games, it's fun for a while to be overpowered beyond belief, but it'll get old after a while. The enemies. There isn't much for enemy variety here. They're humans, dogs, orc dudes, orc robots, and in 2 levels or so, they're Tyranids. When you get into shooting them, you handle all of them pretty much the exact same. There isn't any Marauder or Angel type enemy to spice up the gameplay and make you change your game plan. You'll deal with pretty much all of them the exact same. And this next point I want to get into pretty much bleeds into this one. So let's get right into it. Difficulty. The difficulty will either range from trivial to brain-numbingly annoying. Notice I didn't choose the word hard. I said annoying. Every time I've played this game, I'm pretty sure I've played it on the highest difficulty. I wanted the most bang for my buck, and honestly, I don't see how else you play it. On anything lower, I imagine it'd be a cakewalk, since I don't even really die that frequently when I play it. But when I do die, it feels like bullshit. A majority of the enemies you'll face in this game are humans, most of which have hit scan weapons. How do you dodge hit scan weapons? You fucking tell me, I guess. Sure, you're moving really fast most of the time, so it's hard for them to hit you. But on the higher difficulties, you fold like a chair if you get hit once or twice. There will be times where your character will spaz out and die for what feels like no reason. And this isn't even talking about the bomb bots. These orc bots are irritating as hell in this game, because it feels like you have to melt them in seconds or else you're in danger of being one-tapped. The rockets they shoot aggressively track your location and are really fast. If any pixel of an explosion touches your character, it's a life. These are probably the most annoying enemies in the game just because of that, to be honest. And honestly, the rest are just pitifully easy. I can't ever recall a time I died from the orcs or the dogs. They just run up to you. And you pump out so much damage in this game, they get melted really, really fast. Speaking of doing a ton of damage, the guns. A few complaints here, honestly. The guns are nicely modeled, and a lot of them are Warhammer iconic weapons, as I said earlier. But they have a lot of issues gameplay-wise. First of all, a lot of them blend together when you're using them. All the assault rifles are pretty much interchangeable, as they have no super huge differences in between them. The semi-automatic weapons are pretty much pointless because they do so much less damage than the auto weapons, and you have to be accurate with them. And then some of the other weapons are just too fucking big. If you use the heavy bolter, it takes up like a third of your screen. And if you're reloading it, you might as well close your eyes because you're not seeing anything for a second. Then the quirky weapons range from fucking awful to absolutely broken. Epitaph, for example, is a sawed-off shotgun. And base, the thing's useless as it doesn't do much damage. If you switch it over to the anti-shield rounds, the thing becomes the most accurate sniper in the game, capable of one-shotting most things, but you have to perfectly lock onto your target. Then there's the other side of the spectrum, which has the grav gun. The grav gun shoots basically a homing black hole that in very rare occasions will take 3 shots to kill, but in most cases it'll just take 1 or 2. And then when you kill someone with it, it shoots a stronger AoE explosion that'll most likely one-tap every enemy around it. Other than its low ammo count, it has no flaws at all. It's quite literally the perfect gun. Even without weapon mods, this gun by itself will let you shit on most of the enemies in this game. And the other weapons, I really don't feel like wasting time talking about them, so they fit into 2 groups. Overly bulky and outclassed by other weapons, or bad, the cutscenes. Oh lord, the cutscenes. They clearly aren't where the budget was. Like I said in the Underhive Wars video, the issues with the story cutscenes can be overlooked because the base game is good, but god damn they're rough. It looks like someone new fiddling around in Blender. I can't think of a single cutscene involving humans in this game that knocked my socks off. As for the VAs, the other NPCs have generic voice syndrome like Underhive did, where either they sound like a normal person, and if not, they sound like they're a little under the mark, with the majority going to the latter more than the former. But let me be clear, it's definitely not as noticeable as Underhive's voice issues were. I think here it's more of the femme protag's voice being so good she overshadows a lot of the other performances. And since we're on this section, I guess I could slide my little thoughts about the story in here too. It's fine. Pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of things, honestly. Takedowns. I've never seen takedowns handled in anything else like how they are in this game. In Doom Eternal and most other games like this, you get an enemy's health low, then they glow or something, and then you execute them. Hired Gun's quirky, so you can just execute most things immediately. You just walk up to them and hit the takedown button and nothing else is required. It's such a baffling choice, I don't even know why it's here. It's not something absolutely game-shattering since, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of enemies will just shoot and kill you in a few seconds, but it's a weird design choice nonetheless. Also, the game just won't let you do it sometimes. I don't know if it's a bug or something, but there will be times where they just block you from hitting the button for no reason. In conclusion, you may think I hate this game due to all the flaws I just rambled off to you, but like I said, this game pretty much wore its problems on its sleeves. These aren't problems you aren't aware of if you've touched the game for longer than 5 minutes. And at the end of the day, I don't think a lot of those problems really matter. The core of it is a fun game. Sure, I got nitpicks here and there, but when I bought the game, I knew it wasn't going to be polished to perfection. I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. I obviously can't overlook the downsides, but when you get into the certain flow of things, it's just fun to blast through all these enemies with your ridiculous powers, cyber dogs, and busted arsenal. It knows it's broken and a little weird, but it doesn't hide that fact from you either. What I pay full price for it? Probably not. It doesn't cost the price of a AAA game, but if you want to be real safe, I'd wait until it goes on sale. You don't even have to be a Warhammer fan. If you're into movement shooters, I can't imagine that you'd hate this game. But what do you guys think? As always, I'm glad to discuss with you in the comments, and I've been M, and I am out.